Chapter 686. Young Master, General Lumik's army has been completely annihilated, and the general has also died in battle. We should withdraw. A guard rode up to Hilaruo and spoke in an urgent voice. He didn't directly say that they had lost, and only said to withdraw. This was already giving Hilaruo a lot of face. Although the young master couldn't figure out the reason, his desire to live still prevailed. Okay, we'll withdraw now. Withdraw. Young master, should we inform the others to retreat as well? Another bodyguard seemed to have suddenly thought of something as he asked. No need. Let them stay and block the enemy. The rest of us will withdraw. Hilaruo had completely calmed down. It was precisely because of this that he said this. From this point alone, it could be seen that he was a ruthless person who would do anything to achieve his goals. Under the cover of darkness, the chaos on the battlefield, and the lag in information, Hilaruo escaped without a word. What he left behind were the corpses of nearly 5,000 cavalry, including Lumik and the captives. Hilaruo made a very smart choice and left with less than 10 guards, so no one discovered his tracks. It wasn't until the battlefield was cleaned that they discovered that his corpse was nowhere to be found. But this wasn't important. What was important was that they had won this battle. The Jurchen cavalry had used their own strength to prove their ability and obtained Yang Qindong's attention. It was already late at night, and the short stone pile was still brightly lit with torches. After the battle, the Jurchen cavalry were still cleaning up the battlefield. Fortunately, Tiger's Mane arrived in time with the 6 cavalry battalions of the Independent Regiment, greatly increasing the speed of the cleanup. The 5-starred flag was still there as before, unfurling in the wind. Beta Persei had already prepared a military tent for him to rest in. More than usual, he had prepared an extra tent for Princess Tuaya. This time, Tuaya didn't escape. When the battle wasn't over, she even pulled out her saber, as if she wanted to charge down with Yang Qindong. Her image as a heroine won the basic respect of everyone. It was late at night, and Yang Qindong hadn't gone to bed yet. He called Tiger's Mane, Yila, Lu Dai, and the others over for an impromptu military meeting. Looking at Tiger's Mane and Yela, Yang Qindong's words of encouragement rang out. The Nuzan cavalry performed very well in this battle. You will be rewarded handsomely, and your contributions will be doubled. You will have the first pick of the captives to make up for the losses in this battle. After daybreak, collect the bodies of the martyrs and hold a memorial service. The Independent Regiment is worthy of praise for their timely rescue. The extra war horses will be used as a reward to gradually develop all of the infantry into cavalry. Thank you, young master. Thank you, 6th young master. Tiger's Mane, Yela, Lu Dai, and the others were all overjoyed. Although they had also lost people in this battle, especially the Nuzan cavalry who had lost close to 500 people, how could there be no deaths in a war? For the sake of Jurchen's future, this sacrifice was worth it. After the meeting, most of them didn't rest. Instead, they continued to clean up the battlefield. They dug several huge pits to bury the dead. This was also a form of respect for their opponents. Otherwise, in such an environment, the corpses of the dead soldiers would end up in the crows' hands. Summer nights were always very short. At around 3 o'clock, the sky had already begun to brighten. The field of vision was vast, and the speed of cleaning up the battlefield became even faster. After burying the dead, Yela and Lu Dai also selected 500 elite soldiers from the captives. As long as they trained a little, they would be able to make up for the losses in the previous battle. Tiger's Mane counted the number of war horses. There were more than 4,000 of them. When the 10 infantry battalions arrived, all of them could be turned into cavalry. The cavalry and horses were like brothers. It was precisely because of this special relationship that when the cavalry charged, very few people would take the initiative to hurt the horses. Unless they couldn't fight, otherwise, no one would deliberately hurt the horses. In this way, it was convenient for the 5-star regiment and helped the Independent Regiment. When the sky was completely bright, breakfast was already ready. Smoke rose in spirals from the kitchen, and the aroma of meat floated everywhere. Tuaya also woke up from her sleep in the tent. She looked at the 5-star army with a curious expression on her face. Breakfast was ready, but the 5-star army didn't satisfy their appetite. Instead, They gathered together and held a memorial service for the dead soldiers under the leadership of Yang Chendong. Their achievements were read out loud. Even the names of the people were read out by Yang Chendong. Many of the Nuzen cavalry cried at the scene. Obviously, after this memorial service, they were moved by Yang Chendong's actions and became more united. After killing a few Walla prisoners who refused to surrender to comfort the souls of the dead soldiers in heaven, breakfast began. Although the food was not as warm as before, none of the soldiers said anything about it. The memorial service still lingered in their minds for a long time. Some of them even thought that if they died in battle, their names would be read out by the sixth young master in front of everyone. Perhaps that would be the proudest moment of their lives. 7 a.m. The sun hung high in the sky. Anyone who knew about the weather knew that today was going to be another sunny day. At this time, a large number of cavalry suddenly appeared from the northeast direction of the short rock pile. A large number of cavalry appeared in the northeast direction. Everyone, get on your horses and get into formation. After the scouts at the front reported the news, the 5-star army became lively. No matter if it was the Nuzen cavalry or the soldiers of the independent regiment, no one felt afraid at this moment. Instead, they all revealed a firm fighting spirit. Perhaps people would die in war, but for some people, wasn't it a chance to show off? Tuaya stood at the highest point of the short rock pile and looked from afar. When she finally saw the enemy's flag, she jumped up like a little girl. It's the Mongol army of the Gobi Desert. It's the Mongol army of the Gobi Desert. Everyone, don't be nervous. They're on our side. The 5-star army didn't seem to hear them. Everyone's eyes were still filled with determination and killing intent. Report. A large number of infantry appeared in the east. It should be the independent regiment's infantry. The scout reported another piece of news. Yang Chendong, who was riding on the white dragon horse, smiled. Let Tiger's Mane bring them here. Commander Yin, come here. Yang Chendong pointed at Yinda, the company commander of the reconnaissance battalion, who came to report the news. While the latter looked excited, Yang Chendong called him to his side and whispered something to him. Then, he nodded repeatedly and spurred his horse away. Soon, he disappeared without a trace. Tuaya didn't look at what Yang Chendong was doing. After seeing the 5-star army's strong fighting spirit, she was still full of fighting spirit even though she didn't have much rest last night. She left on her horse and went straight to meet the Mongol army of the Gobi Desert. After seeing the 5-star army's fighting strength, she didn't want her own army to be enemies with them. That wouldn't be a good thing. As soon as Tuaya left, Beta Persei came to Yang Chendong. Young master, Princess Tuaya still has a good impression of you. You might be a family in the future. Do you want me to tell the brothers to relax? Don't be so tense. You're acting like enemies. How can we be a family? Beta Persei, I think your skin is tight recently. It seems that the burden I gave you isn't heavy enough. How about this? After you go back this time, train the logistics camp well. The standard will be based on the results of the 3rd-class army assessment. Yang Chendong said with a smile that wasn't a smile. No, young master, I'm talking too much. I didn't say anything. Beta Persei kept waving his hands and immediately admitted defeat. How could he not know what the logistics camp was like? They were all old and weak Ming captives. Some of their bodies could be described as thin as a match. It was a miracle that they could live until now. How could they be trained to the level of a 3rd-class army? Even a 4th-class army would barely touch the boundary. Beta Persei admitted defeat. Yang Chendong didn't want to pursue him. Instead, he looked at the approaching Gobi Desert Mongol army and said, remember, in this world, benefits are always as big as the sky. With enough benefits, enemies can become friends, and friends can become enemies. This requires us to be vigilant at all times. We can't make the mistake of underestimating the enemy because of taking things for granted. If that happens, we'll be the sinners of the army. Beta Persei nodded thoughtfully as he listened. Only Yang Chendong knew that the 5-star army could be considered as a lone army on the prairie. Any force here could become a friend or an enemy. Once a step was wrong, it could lead to eternal damnation. As the commander of an army, he must be careful. Tuaya rode a horse to meet the approaching Gobi Desert Mongol army. In the leading position of the army, she saw a middle-aged man in his 50s. A woman's voice of joy sounded first. "Father, why are you here?" "Tuaya." When the middle-aged man saw that the person coming from afar was his only daughter, his frosty face finally changed and a smile appeared on his face. When the father and daughter reunited, Sudor Khan looked at his daughter and found that she didn't change at all. When he found that there wasn't a single wound on her body, the smile on his face slowly disappeared. Baoin came back and said that Hararuo, that bastard toad who wants to eat swan meat, brought a lot of cavalry to threaten you. Since you're fine now, where is he? Don't be afraid. Although father came in a hurry this time, I also brought 20,000 cavalry. Sud's bloodline was a branch of the Golden family. Although it couldn't be said to be completely orthodox, there was a natural nobility in the bloodline. People like him were prideful. Once someone like him decided to do something, he would have a lot of charisma. Being able to gather 20,000 cavalry in such a short time was enough to show his ability. Chapter 687. Tuaya was very touched that her father had brought 20,000 cavalrymen to save her. But when it came to Haraluo, she still said proudly, "Haraluo? He has already been defeated and fled." Ran away? Suede's expression froze. How many cavalrymen did he bring with him? And who was it that chased them away? Facing her father, Tuaya naturally wouldn't hide anything. She told him everything she had heard and seen. After she finished talking about Halaruo's defeat and Lumik's decapitation, she continued to chatter. "Father, this 5-star army is very interesting. They even held a memorial service for the dead. They recited the names of all the dead soldiers. You don't know this, but many of the warriors who were still alive were moved to tears." Suede wasn't interested in this memorial service. In his opinion, they had held such a service before. Wasn't it just inviting people to cross the dead? What he was curious about was where this 5-star army came from and why they were so strong. Why hadn't he heard of them before? Of course, the memorial service wasn't an ordinary one. Tuaya didn't know about this, so she didn't explain. As for the 5-star army's strength, it was already proven. There was no need to explain. "Tuaya, have you figured out the origin of this 5-star army?" Suede was more curious about where this cavalryman who defeated Haraluo belonged to. Were they on good terms with the Mongols? Walla. What about Tatar or Great Ming? I don't know. Tuaya was suddenly interrupted by her father. She looked a little unhappy. However, this was her father, who she had always treated with dignity and respect since she was young. She could only think about it in her heart, but she didn't dare to show it. Suede had expected Tuaya to say she didn't know, so he didn't pursue the matter. Instead, he continued to ask, "You said they fought for an entire night and didn't rest? Then they should be very tired, right?" Previously, Baoin reported that the enemy cavalry had a type of armor that was not afraid of ordinary swords and spears. That is definitely something good. Do you think that if we attack now, these things will fall into the hands of our Mongol army? Suda's tone changed, and he looked like he was about to snatch it. When Tuaya heard this, her eyes couldn't help but widen. "Father, that kind of black armor is very powerful. Even when I wanted to buy it before, they didn't have any intention of selling it. Because that thing is too powerful, even if we want to snatch it, it won't be easy. Besides, they just saved my daughter's life." Tuaya naturally didn't want the Mongol army and the 5-star army to fight. Let's not talk about who wins and who loses first. When two tigers fight, one of them is bound to be injured. At that time, no matter who won or lost, it would not be the result she wanted to see. Tuaya's impatience had already shown on her face, and she seemed to want to dissuade him. However, Suda had already opened his mouth. "Let's see. We want to buy it, but they won't sell it. Then we can only snatch it. As for battle strength, don't you have confidence in our Mongol army? As for them saving you, it was just along the way. They were saving themselves." With just a few words, he made the 5-star army look like they had nothing to do. It also revealed his determination to fight. They had just wiped out Hararuo's 5,000 cavalry and seized Zhengfeng. They had just gone through a huge battle and were exhausted. If they didn't attack now, it would be difficult to find a suitable opportunity. Kamubala secretly passed down the order. "When I give the order, the entire army will charge." Since he had made the decision, Suda naturally wouldn't be disturbed by others. He gave the order in front of Tuaya. Kamubala, translated from Chinese, mint white tiger. This person was indeed the bravest general by Su Da's side. Knowing that there was a battle to fight, he immediately agreed with a face full of excitement. He turned around and let his personal guard pass the message. "Father, you can't." Tuaya's eyes were filled with shock. She knew the battle strength of the 5-star army. She also knew how powerful those black cavalry guards were. Although they had just gone through a huge battle, she felt that when facing Hiraruo's 5,000 cavalry, the 5-star army didn't use their full strength. At least, that young Master Yang didn't show any signs of worry. When she thought of that young face and his casual attitude towards everything, Tuaya didn't know why, but she felt a wave of uncertainty in her heart. "Bao Yin, take the princess away. If she shouts again, seal her mouth." Suda seemed to know that Tuaya would stop him and was already prepared. After giving the order, Bao Yin walked out from the troops and looked at Tuaya with a troubled expression. "Princess, I'm sorry." After saying that, 2 cavalrymen walked in front of Tuaya and forcefully brought her to the back of the troops. Without any obstruction, Suda rode on his horse and led the 20,000 cavalrymen forward. In order to avoid alerting the enemy, he didn't speed up. On the surface, everything seemed normal. Tuaya had already said that there were less than 10,000 soldiers in the 5-star army. Among them, there were 4,000 infantrymen. In front of his 20,000 cavalrymen, this kind of strength was indeed not enough. On top of a pile of rocks, Yang Chendong gently put down his binoculars and a look of contempt flashed across his face. "Inform everyone to prepare for battle." Oh, this time, Beta Persei didn't object. He also used his binoculars to see the scene of Tuaya being forcefully taken away. Because of this, he also knew that everything was as the young master had predicted. This Mongol army that came from afar was not a friend, but an enemy. After the order was given, and knowing that there was going to be a huge battle, whether it was the Nuzan cavalry or Tiger's Main's independent regiment, they all became excited. However, although the latter was excited, when he saw the 10 auxiliary troops that had just arrived, he couldn't help but scratch his head. Although they had war horses now, they didn't have time to adapt. If the cavalrymen and war horses didn't get used to each other, and there wasn't enough communication, forcefully entering the battlefield was no different from courting death. They simply couldn't display their original strength. Don't distribute the horses anymore. Everyone, prepare the infantry formation and prepare to meet the enemy. Tiger's Main indeed gave the order. On the battlefield, cavalry wasn't necessarily stronger than infantrymen. Although this was the case in theory, it was best to choose the one that was suitable for oneself. Reluctantly giving up on the horses that were about to be theirs, the 10 battalions, a total of 4,000 soldiers of the independent regiment, began to form into battle formations. Each of them held spears and spears that were specially designed to deal with cavalry, forming a square formation as they searched for a suitable place for them to fight. Yang Chendong still chose to fight at the short pile of rocks. He was indeed thankful for this kind of terrain. If it was a wide area, the enemy's 20,000 cavalrymen would be able to charge back and forth and break the formation of the 5-star army. At that time, even if they could obtain the final victory, who knew what kind of heavy price they would have to pay because of it? Of course, although the terrain was suitable, the opportunity was not within Yang Chendong's expectations. They just came out to take a short break and wanted to find a quiet place to rest for half a day. However, they did end up in a huge battle. The 5-star army that had just gone through a battle and hadn't had a good rest obviously hadn't fully recovered their strength. For the same reason, the Mongol army from Gobi also came from afar and didn't have a good rest after a night of rushing. In this comparison, it was a draw, and no one would have a big advantage. The 20,000 Mongol cavalry were still slowly closing in. They were not in a rush and were approaching from afar. The distance between the two sides quickly shortened from 3 li to 2 li. When they were half a li away, Beta Persei was already in front of the Mongol army. "My young master said that in front of us is our area. Please stop here, otherwise, it will hurt the peace between both sides." Beta Persei rode on his horse and said with a loud voice. He had a loud voice to begin with, and without any restraint, his voice traveled far and wide. At least at this moment, The armies on both sides could hear him clearly. The five-star army actually discovered his army's intentions in time. This was somewhat out of head suitor's expectations. He didn't know that Yang Chendong and the others were watching his every move with binoculars. He also didn't know that Yang Chendong, who had undergone lip-reading training, had already seen through every word he said. But this was no longer important. Since the other side was about to shed all pretense of cordiality, what was there to hesitate about? Head suitor looked at Beta Persei and said, "This place has been our Mongol territory since ancient times. You Han people have already crossed the line by appearing here. What reason do you have for us to stop? It seems that your five-star army is too arrogant. Do you really think that you are invincible just because you defeated the incompetent Halal? What a joke." After a burst of laughter, head suitor looked at Beta Persei again. His eyes were filled with killing intent. "And you? You actually dare to stand in front of this Khan? Do you know that you are playing with fire by doing this? Now that we are so close, I can capture you with a wave of my hand. Where do you think you are going to run?" Head suitor's face was filled with anger and hatred as he spoke. Once upon a time, the Mongols were so mighty. Their ancestors had crossed the Eurasian continent, and no matter where they went, they had no opponents. It was because of the appearance of the great Ming dynasty that their legend of invincibility was broken. Emperor Zhu Di of the Ming dynasty personally led the army to attack the Mongols 5 times and suppress their former glory. Just based on this, he had no reason to be nice to the Han people. Perhaps in head suitor's heart, he had already classified the 5-star army as the Ming dynasty's army. Chapter 688. You want to capture me? Beta Persei had a look of disdain in the face of the arrogant suitor. How about it? Do you still dare to resist? Suitor's face darkened when he saw that a small messenger of the enemy dared to show off in front of him. He was furious. Resist? Ha ha ha. This time, it was Beta Persei's turn to laugh. He didn't learn much from following Yang Chendong every day, but he did learn about 80% of his calmness and pretentiousness. The word resist is used by the weak against the strong. You're not the strong ones now, so the word resist is not appropriate. What I should say is, do you still resist? Believe it or not, we can bet that your people will never be able to get within 3 steps of me. Impudent. Suda had never been looked down upon like this before. Even someone of Agar Dorji's status would be polite to him. Even if he had a strong killing intent in his heart, he would not show any disrespect on his face. However, this foolish and boorish messenger had ignored him in front of so many people. Yes, he was stupid and crude. Otherwise, how could he be so blind and dare to threaten him at such a close distance? Although some people said that envoys were not killed in a war between 2 armies. But when one's strength reached a certain level, so what if one broke the rules? The rules were meant to be broken, weren't they? In a fit of rage, Suitor pointed his index finger at Beta Persei in front of him and said through gritted teeth, "Who's going to take him down for this, Khan?" As soon as Suitor shouted, a guard behind him immediately responded, "Khan, leave this small fry to me to deal with." To be able to stand behind Suitor, he was either a general or a guard. But no matter which type it was, they were all very agile and vigorous. As soon as he finished speaking, a rider rushed out from the group and shouted at Beta Persei to approach him step by step. 10 steps, 8 steps, 6 steps, and he was getting closer and closer. On the other hand, Tiger's mane acted as if he didn't see anything. He stood there unhurriedly, allowing the other party to come closer as if he didn't hear anything. 5 steps, 3 steps. The big hand had already reached out and was about to touch Beta Persei's body when suddenly, the sound of a horn rang out. The person who was rushing over lost his balance and fell to the ground with a plop. The man landed on the horse, causing the warhorse to neigh. It seemed to be crying out for its master, but it also seemed to be summoning its master. It's a gun. Suda was indeed a Khan. He was experienced and knowledgeable. When the situation suddenly changed, he instinctively shouted and then quickly hid behind a few of his personal guards. When Huachong shouted, not only Suda Khan, even General Zamubala, who was known as the White Tiger, quickly hid behind a few of his personal guards and completely hid his body. Originally, They were aggressive and wanted to capture Beta Persei and punish him. But unexpectedly, the situation changed. The people they sent out died before they could even touch the corner of Beta Persei's clothes. This change shocked many of the Mongolian cavalry, especially the personal guards who were used as shields in front of them. Everyone's expression changed drastically. They were afraid that they would become the target in the next second and die on their horses. Ha ha, ha ha ha. Beta Persei saw the Mongolian cavalry's reaction and he laughed mockingly. Where's the person who spoke to me just now? Did he hide in his turtle shell like a tortoise? Ha ha ha. As the Khan of the Mongolian desert, when had Suitor ever been looked down upon like this? Beta Persei's shout was so loud that it was clearly a slap to his face. Even if he hid behind his personal guards, he still felt a burning pain on his face. On top of the short rocks, the black cavalry guards were standing with their spears. The shot just now was aimed at Yang Qindong's head and tail. At a distance of more than 700 meters, it was not easy to kill the enemy without hurting Beta Persei. Sixth young master, why didn't you finish off that old Khan Suitor just now? Qiu Vi, the captain of the first guard, asked with a puzzled expression as he looked at the enemy with his gun. Not only him, but the rest of the guards also listened attentively. They also did not understand the sixth young master's actions. However, Yang Qindong shook his head helplessly. Princess Tuoya once said that her father, Khan Suitor, has the bloodline of the Golden family. Once such a person is killed, it's equivalent to fighting the entire Mongolian army to the death. Right now, we're not strong enough. If others don't provoke us, we don't need to kill them all. But if we kill this Suitor, we'll become enemies with the entire Mongolian army. Even if it's for our dignity, we won't be able to live in peace with them anymore. If Yang Qindong's goal was like Zhu Di's, which was to conquer the grasslands for the next few decades of peace in the Ming dynasty, of course, he would have directly killed Suitor just now. But his goal was much bigger than this. In order to resolve a momentary hatred, killing Suitor would cut off the possibility of cooperation with the entire Mongolian army. Clearly, the gains did not make up for the losses. On this side, Yang Qindong was still explaining the overall situation to the guards. On Beta Persei's side, he was still cursing. He really did not care about the fact that Suitor was a Khan. Where was Suitor's face? Being constantly mocked and ridiculed, Suitor's entire body was already trembling. He could not let the other party continue. Otherwise, his lifetime of wisdom would be destroyed in a day. It seemed that the other party already knew his intentions. Since that was the case, he would just have to force his way through. He did not believe that with his absolute advantage in numbers, he would not be able to destroy the other party. Beta Persei was still cursing. You're the ones who are ungrateful. Previously, my young master risked countless dangers to save your princess, and now you want to start a war with us? Everyone says that you Mongolians are born righteous, but what are you doing now? Where's your gratitude? Where's your sense of shame? Do you still have any shame? Bah. Even if we saved a dog, it would still know to wag its tail at us to express its gratitude. When we need them, they can even guard the house. But the person who saved you, you want to hurt your benefactor? Where's your bottom line? What's the difference between you and an animal? No, you're worse than an animal. I'm so angry. Suitor could not hold back anymore. Suddenly, he shouted and interrupted Beta Persei's voice. Mongolian warriors, the other party used firearms just now. They are undoubtedly the Ming army. Thinking back, how many of our ancestors died in the hands of the Ming army? Now, the Ming dynasty is no longer the same as before. The Walla is fighting with them and has gained a certain advantage. They are no longer the world's strongest army. Now is the time for us to avenge our ancestors. Listen to my command. Charge. Charge. General Zamubala also hid behind his bodyguard and shouted. When they were scolded by Beta Persei, many of the Mongolian soldiers lowered their heads and the morale of the entire army dropped by a lot. Now that Suitor's shout mentioned the hatred of their ancestors, everyone's common hatred for the enemy was stimulated from the bottom of their hearts. Just as the order to charge was given, the 20,000 cavalrymen shouted and suddenly charged forward like a flood of fierce beasts. Oh my God! Beta Persei was still scolding to his heart's content when the enemy suddenly moved. he shouted and turned his horse around to leave. 1 against 10,000. No matter how strong he was, it was impossible for him to win. Beta Persei turned around and ran, accompanied by bursts of gunfire. As the bullets whistled through the air, the Mongolian cavalrymen charging at the front were shot down one by one. This hindered the enemy's attack and gave Beta Persei a chance and time to escape. Suitor, who was hiding behind his bodyguard, felt that the cavalrymen were being suppressed and could not help but shout, "Everyone, don't be afraid. Firearms are single-use items. Every shot counts. Everyone, charge together. They won't be able to hurt any of us. Charge, charge. Everyone, split the gold, silver, and horses in their hands." In order to raise morale, Suitor promised to split the spoils equally. As soon as he said this, the Mongolian cavalrymen who were still hesitating shouted and charged forward. In the face of enough benefits, even if there was danger, there were still people who would take the risk. On the pile of short rocks, Yang Chendong led the 2 bodyguards and kept firing bullets. One after another, the Mongolian cavalrymen fell on the road ahead. However, the cavalrymen were too fast. In the blink of an eye, they had rushed forward from the original distance of 1.5 miles. At that moment, their bows and arrows could already be fired. Yang Chendong and the bodyguards had no choice but to put on their masks to protect themselves. The arrows fell like rain. Compared to their fighting skills on horseback, the Mongolian cavalrymen who were known to have grown up on horseback performed very well. They were either riding on horseback, shooting arrows while climbing on horseback, or shooting arrows while hanging upside down from a golden hook. For a moment, arrows rained down like rain, landing on Yang Chendong and the others, producing a series of crackling sounds. Fire! Charge! Under the pile of short rocks, Yella led the Jurchens and started a fierce counterattack. The same arrows were shot out and landed among the Mongolian army, causing the cavalrymen to fall off their horses. Fire! Fire! At the independent regiment, Tiger's man ordered the 10 infantry battalions to fire arrows from afar. At the same time, he led 6 cavalry battalions into the designated area. He wanted to rely on the advantageous terrain and take advantage of the fact that the enemy could not fully deploy their forces to attack. In the process of charging, the vanguard of the Mongolian cavalrymen were first attacked by the Style 95 and then by the arrows. They suffered heavy losses. The general who led the team saw that they had lost more than 30% of their forces before they even reached the enemy. He had no choice but to change the direction of the assault. He no longer shot at Yang Chendong but at the Jurchens. Yang Chendong's side became quiet again. "Look, is there anyone injured?" "Sixth young master, our armor is impenetrable. There are no injured members." Cho Wu and Dao Xiao, the 2 captains, checked the armor and reported. Chapter 689. Okay, then let's prepare to counterattack. Look carefully and shoot. We have to hit them until they can't even find north. Yang Chendong took off the Type 95 pistol from his back and reloaded it with a new magazine. Then, he aimed and pulled the trigger. Beta Persei had already returned to the team and was also aiming with the Type 95 pistol. There were simply too many Mongol cavalry, and they were everywhere in sight. This made it so that they didn't need to aim too much. They just needed to fire based on their instincts, and often, an enemy would be shot and fall off their horse. Although the number of guards was limited, wherever they aimed, the Mongolian army would be heavily injured. This greatly suppressed the enemy's morale and courage. Still hiding behind his bodyguard, Swade stared at the pile of short rocks with a face full of anger. He couldn't understand how the enemy's muskets were so powerful that they could shoot so many bullets and injure so many of his soldiers. "No, we can't let them kill without any scruples. Men, send out 1,000 cavalry and charge forward. I don't care what method we use, we have to destroy these people. We can't let them become a threat." As soon as the Khan gave the order, a cavalry of 1,000 men charged towards the pile of rocks. "They're finally here." Yang Chendong had already expected that the enemy would send troops to restrain him. He sneered, "Fire at them. I want to see if they're made of iron. Facing our bullets, will they be afraid?" It was only 1,000 cavalrymen, so Yang Chendong and the guards didn't really care about them. After everyone agreed in unison, They turned the muzzles and aimed at the charging cavalrymen and pulled the trigger. As gunshots rang out, countless cavalrymen fell off their horses. Although they charged very quickly, they still lost more than half of their forces in the process. Put away your guns. Attack. Seeing that the enemy was less than 100 meters away from him, Suede immediately shouted. Yang Chendong immediately put the 95 style on his back and pulled out his cavalry saber. With a shout, he rushed towards the pile of short rocks. Along with him were more than 100 black cavalry guards. They charged down like ferocious tigers. With their sturdy armor, it was as if they had entered an unstoppable state. They could cut down and kill whoever they wanted. The Mongolian cavalry fell off their horses one after another. Streams of blood flew out and dyed the sabers red. The setting sun was like blood. The Nuzan cavalry had already been surrounded by the Mongol vanguard. Both sides were engaged in a bloody battle. Dust flew up once again, and the only thing that could be heard were the roars and shouts of killing. As the Mongolian general, Kamubala didn't choose the Nuzan cavalry as his opponent. With the idea of picking the weakest among them, he set his sights on the 10 infantry battalions of the independent regiment. The advantage of cavalry against infantry was quite obvious. Looking from afar, infantry didn't have the mobility of cavalry. They formed a square formation with 400 men. They formed a tight square formation with black shields around them to protect their own safety. Outside the square formation, there were rows of barricades. It was as if they were telling the cavalry not to provoke them, or they would be hurt. Let's kill these infantry first, Zamubala said bluntly. Clearly, he didn't care about the formation of the infantrymen. The cavalry behind him was already eager to give it a try. The sabers in their hands were also ready to taste blood. As soon as the order was given, they would engulf and drown the infantry phalanx in an overwhelming manner. Kill. Zamubala raised the saber in his hand, and a crazed expression appeared on his face. He opened his mouth wide and swung his right arm forward. His legs clamped down hard, and the warhorse under him leaped forward as if their hearts were connected. In front of the infantry formation, there were hundreds of shield-wielding soldiers. They tried their best to hide behind the 1-meter-tall iron shields. When the cavalry launched their attack, waves of arrows fell on the shields like raindrops. Crackling sounds could be heard. When the cavalry attacked the infantry, they would use bows and arrows to kill them. If used well, a wave of arrows could often severely injure the enemy. When the cavalry truly arrived, the morale of the army would be crushed. In other words, the infantry could only passively defend against the cavalry's attack. It was as natural as a cat eating a mouse. However, when the 5-star army was involved in this matter, it was a completely different matter. Only defending and not attacking wasn't their habit. Split. After seeing the shield-bearers block the enemy's first wave of arrows, the battalion commanders of each infantry phalanx shouted out loud. The originally airtight square formation suddenly split into two from the middle. In the middle of the square formation, there were hundreds of musketeers. Some of them were lying on the ground, some were half squatting, and some were standing. They were divided into several echelons and formed a unique scenery. Fire! 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 When the battalion commander gave the order to attack with a hoarse roar, the 100 gunmen with Type 81 rifles began to spit out their own tongues of fire. As the gunshots rang out, the enemy riders fell to the ground one by one in coordination with the sound of the gunshots. Since they were prepared, the Mongol cavalry were caught off guard. Some of them were just brandishing their sabers when they were shot in the chest. Some of them had just jumped over the barricades when they were shot in midair along with their horses. Some of them were running with their heads down when they felt a sharp pain in their chest and fell off their horses with a plop. Even more of them had lost their lives before they could even figure out what had happened. Even if they were dead, their horses were still running forward without them knowing. Luckily, the dense barricades were effective. In the end, without the guidance of their owners, the war horses were forced to stop in front of the barricades. The musketeers were the original auxiliary soldiers. The current independent regiment was built on the foundation of the 6 auxiliary battalions. In other words, there were more than 2,000 auxiliary soldiers who knew how to use guns well. Now, there were only 10 infantry formations, and each formation only had 100 gunners. It was easy to gather them. This was also the trump card that Tiger Edge had prepared when training the infantry of the Independent Regiment. Now that it was used, it brought about an astonishing power and effect. The 1,000 auxiliary soldiers each held a Type 81 rifle that was much more powerful than the Type 81 rifles of this era. When the sound of gunshots rang out and the enemy cavalry was killed one by one on their horses, it was a shocking sight. Even the soldiers of the other independent regiments who were captured during the Battle of Liaohe were shocked by the strength of the auxiliary soldiers. It wasn't that they hadn't seen muskets before. In fact, because they were all comrades, they had even seen them up close. It was just that before they became auxiliary soldiers, they didn't even have the right to touch a gun. Because of this, many of their comrades were angry. They thought, "What are you guys so proud of? Isn't it just muskets?" The Great Ming Empire already has these things in their army. However, when they saw and experienced everything, they were still shocked. They were both muskets, but there were obviously too many differences. For example, the stability, continuity, lethality, and so on. Although they only served in the new Urgandusi region and didn't have the chance to come into contact with muskets, they could still feel the difference between the muskets in their comrades' hands and the Great Ming Empire's. This was because if the Great Ming Empire had muskets with such lethality, with their advantage in numbers, would there be anyone who could be their opponent? The Divine Arms Battalion. Zamubala's face, which was as red as blood, showed a horrified expression. Decades ago, the Great Ming Empire relied on the muskets of the Divine Arms Battalion to defeat their ancestors. After all these years, they originally thought that the Great Ming Empire had been divided into the north and the south. They originally thought that Bai Ming was an arrow at the end of its flight after the incident at the Timu Fortress. It was time for the Mongolians to rise again. But now, when they saw the scene of thousands of muskets firing at the same time, they knew that the misfortune of the Mongolians had arrived again. It was just a charge, but they lost thousands of cavalrymen. These were all the good men of the Mongolians in the Gobi Desert. They all had families, brothers, and sisters. Now that they had all died in battle here, how was he going to explain it? Zamubala felt like he had punched an iron plate. He originally thought that it would be an easy move to use cavalry to deal with infantry, but now they had suffered heavy losses before they could even charge over. If they continued to fight, how many of their brothers would they have to lose before they could obtain a victory? They were no longer as arrogant as before, nor were they as confident as before. Zamubala wanted to pass on what happened here to the Khan. How could their 20,000 cavalrymen deal with such a powerful enemy who possessed firearms? Zamubala felt a headache coming on. Khan Sud also felt a headache coming on. It was not because of anything else, but because a scout had reported that a large number of cavalrymen had suddenly appeared on both sides of them. Although they could not see the situation of the other party, they should be enemies and not friends. Why are there still enemies? Didn't Tuoya say that the 5-star army has less than 10,000 soldiers? Khan Sud's expression changed from the confident look he had before. He started to feel conflicted. He believed that even if the enemies that appeared on both sides were on the same side as the 5-star army, with his 20,000 Mongolian soldiers, he did not have to worry about losing. But after spending so much effort, and in the end, sacrificing 800 of his own men to kill 1,000 of his enemies, just to fight a bloody battle with a 5-star army that he didn't have much hatred for. Was it worth it? What was his goal? Just as he was conflicted over this question, one of Zamubala's soldiers ran over. Khan, something bad happened. The enemy has the Divine Arms Battalion. The Divine Arms Battalion. What's the matter? Why are you making such a big fuss? Khan Sud was already in a bad mood. When he was shouted, his expression became even worse. Isn't it just the Divine Arms Battalion? I already know. Chapter 690. Of course, Suda knew. Previously, when Beta Persei came over to persuade them not to act rashly, he fired his flintlock, which gave the other party a chance to escape. Flintlocks were indeed one of the nemesis of cavalry, but it was only effective when there were a lot of them. Seeing that Sud Khan didn't seem to pay attention to his shouts, the bodyguard thought for a moment and realized where the problem was. Thus, he shouted again, "Khan, it's thousands of Great Ming's Divine Machine Battalion. They all have powerful flintlocks in their hands. General Zamubala has suffered heavy losses after charging several times. This time, the problem was finally explained clearly, and Suda's expression became more and more unsightly. What? Thousands of Great Ming's Divine Machine Battalion? That must be the Divine Machine Battalion. My God, how is this the 5-star army? It's clearly the main force of the Great Ming dynasty. How did we end up fighting against them? Finally, Suda realized how stupid of a decision he had made. He actually treated the main force of the Great Ming dynasty as a soft persimmon. When he thought of the scene of the Great Ming dynasty sweeping through the grassland decades ago, he felt a chill in his bones. Quickly go and tell General Zamubala to retreat. Retreat? Since they already knew the true situation of the 5-star army, and more importantly, they knew that the enemy had a powerful weapon like the Divine Strategy Battalion. In that case, there was no need for them to continue fighting. If they continued fighting, they would only suffer even greater losses. Looking at the somewhat chaotic battlefield and the dust that filled the sky, no matter how unwilling Suda was, he still made a very unwilling order. Pass down the order. All troops retreat. Finally, the order to retreat was issued. Hearing this, the soldier who passed down the order breathed a sigh of relief for some reason. He was also a cavalryman who had experienced countless battles, but he had never paid such a heavy price in such a short period of time like today. It hadn't even been 2 hours since the start of the war, but as far as he knew, the number of cavalrymen who died in the battle had already reached 3,000. This was still the number of Mongolian soldiers who couldn't be counted. Now, no matter how big the smoke was, it would be difficult to calm down until the result was clear. Even if they lost 3,000 cavalry in 2 hours, it was not a pain that the Mongol army could bear. The 5-star army's reinforcements were about to arrive. Retreating now was the wisest choice. The messenger replied loudly and turned around to pass on the message. For a period of time, regardless of whether it was the Mongolian cavaliers who were fiercely attacking young Chindong's cavaliers at the pile of short rocks or Kambala's men who wanted to take advantage of the situation and use their cavaliers to fight against the infantrymen, when they received the news, all of them sighed in relief, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from their shoulders. Then, they ordered their army to retreat. Zamubala wanted to take advantage of the situation but didn't succeed. Seeing that the situation wasn't good, he wanted to retreat. How could Tiger's Mane give in? Previously, when Zamubala was dealing with the infantry, he didn't have any intention of helping out with the 6 cavalry battalions. This was because he believed in the strength of the infantry battalions. He knew how powerful these infantry battalions were with Type 81 guns. Now that the other party had suffered a loss and was afraid, it was time for him to take advantage of the situation. Come on, cavalry warriors of the independent regiment, it's time for us to perform. Charge with your regiment, commander. Tiger's Mane acted just like how he dealt with Hilaruo's cavaliers. He was the first to charge forward on his horse. Following behind him were 6 battalions, more than 2,000 cavalry warriors with sharp sabers in their hands. They had been conserving their energy at the side. Now that it was finally time for them to act, how could they be courteous? All of them fought to be the first to charge forward and kill the enemy. At the pile of short rocks, the Mongolian cavaliers used various methods to try to surround Yang Chindong's troops. However, after all of them failed, they finally became obedient. Facing the mouth, nose, and eyes that could be injured, they were all helpless. Luckily, the messenger passed on a new order. The Khan ordered the army to retreat. Instantly, everyone heaved a sigh of relief. They didn't stop and turned around to leave. Young master, they are retreating. Beside Yang Chindong, Beta Persei, who was already covered in blood from all the killing, panted heavily as he spoke with a look of satisfaction. It was no wonder that Beta Persei had such a reaction. When he was by the young master's side in the past, he was always worried about the dangers on the front lines. Under normal circumstances, he would be at the command center. This time, relying on the advantage of the black armor and the might of the warhorse, he had finally reached the front lines. Now that he could kill to his heart's content, how could he not be carefree? They are going to escape, but can they escape? Raise the command flag, order the cavaliers to strengthen the 1st and 2nd Regiment to intercept the Mongolian cavaliers. This time, If we don't skin them alive, they can forget about escaping from the hands of this young master. Yang Qindong's eyes flashed with determination. Long before the Mongolian army appeared, the 1st and 2nd Regiment had already rushed to the pile of rocks. However, Yang Qindong didn't let them enter the battlefield immediately. He needed to leave behind a group of fresh troops to face any difficulties and unknown dangers. Since the enemy had retreated, it was naturally time to use their backup plan. Since they had chosen to be his enemy and his warning didn't work, then they had to be prepared for any serious consequences. On the pile of rocks, the command flag was raised high, conveying the 6th young master's order. Outside the battlefield, Windchaser and Lujua had received the order and brought a total of 5,200 cavaliers to prepare to stop the enemy. Not long after Sud Khan gave the order to retreat, Zamubala and the others brought the army back. Compared to when they went to battle, they were naturally in a much more difficult situation. All right, the Han people have a good saying. Victory and defeat are common in war. This time, we lost, but as long as we preserve our strength, we can get it back in the next battle. Now, everyone prepare to retreat. Sud Khan's eyes scanned all the generals and said with a helpless and sorrowful voice, Khan, we still have many cavaliers that haven't returned from the battlefield. Are we waiting? Zamubala looked back at the 4,000 cavaliers that were still fighting in the dust and asked hesitantly when he heard that they were going to retreat now. We're not waiting anymore. Everything depends on their fate. To tell you the truth, a large number of the 5-star army has appeared behind us. Even if we go back now, we have to be prepared to be intercepted. All right, let's not delay any longer and leave now. To be able to become a Khan, one had to have a strong will. A loss was a loss. The most important thing was how to preserve the greatest strength in the face of a loss. As for sacrificing some people, although he felt some pain in his heart, he didn't even blink his eyes. The Khan had a strong will. Furthermore, they knew that the 5-star army was approaching from behind. Who would say anything else? They immediately started to retreat. Zamubala received the order, and together with Bao Yin, each led 5,000 cavalrymen to meet Zhue Feng and Lujua's troops who wanted to intercept them. Suyu led 2,000 cavaliers and his daughter Tuaya through the battlefield and returned from the northeast direction. Although the Mongol army had an absolute advantage in numbers, they still paid the price of 2,000 cavaliers before retreating when they faced the 1st and 2nd Regiment that had been looking forward to a big battle. This was because the 6th young master's flag had clearly stated that they shouldn't chase a cornered enemy. Otherwise, if they were bitten by them, they might have to pay twice the price. Sud Khan retreated, or it could be said that he had escaped. The remaining 4,000 cavaliers that were fighting the Nuzan cavalry did not know about this. The commander of the independent regiment, Tiger's Mane, was ordered to bring 6 battalions of soldiers into the battle. After some instructions, the Nuzan cavalry retreated from the battlefield, leaving only 2,000 Mongol cavaliers searching for their opponents. The 1st and 2nd Regiment also came to the main battlefield. Along with them were the 2,000 war horses that they had just captured, as well as 200 captured Mongol cavaliers. 1st Regiment Zhue Feng reporting to the 6th Young Master, 2nd Regiment Commander Lu Zhuo reporting to the 6th Young Master. Good, you guys came at the right time. Regiment Commander Lu, call Battalion Commander Taimur over. Yang Qindong nodded at the 2 regimental commanders who had just arrived. He then called out 3rd Battalion Commander Taimur. 3rd Battalion Commander, come over. The 6th Young Master is looking for you. Lu Zhuo turned around and shouted. Under everyone's envious gazes, Taimur jumped off his horse and ran over to Yang Qindong. 2nd Regiment Commander Taimur greets the 6th Young Master. He gave a somewhat awkward military salute. Although it was not standard, it was obvious that this Mongol general was trying his best to adapt to the 5-star army's military rules. He returned the salute and lowered his hand. After Taimur lowered his hand, Yang Qindong pointed at the battlefield. There are about 2,000 Mongol cavaliers here. I'll give you a chance. You can convince as many of them as you want to live. If you don't want to surrender, then you can die. Do you understand? Understood, 6th Young Master. Taimur's body trembled. When he understood what the 6th Young Master meant, he immediately gave a solemn military salute. As a Mongol, he naturally did not want to see his comrades die in front of him. Hence, He would do his best to complete this task. Without their opponents, the Mongolian cavaliers became quiet. Gradually, the dust in the air around them finally settled down, and everything that happened on the battlefield was clearly displayed before everyone's eyes. The 2,000 Mongol cavaliers who thought that they had killed all their opponents wanted to cheer in unison for victory. However, when they could clearly see what was happening around them, they saw countless arrows aimed at their chests. At that moment, many of them revealed panicked expressions. What's going on? Where's our Khan? Where's our Mongol army? Don't tell me they were all killed? Chapter 691. That's not possible. Our Khan is so wise. Our Mongolian army has so many people and is so strong. It's impossible for anything to happen to them. All right, can't you see? The number of enemies has increased again. They must have defeated the Khan. The Khan must have given up on us and left us. Then what should we do? Fight them to the death? That's right. What should we do? After the truth came to light, all sorts of discussions could be heard. However, they were all speaking in Mongolian, so they couldn't affect the 5-star army's cavalry that surrounded them. Of course, even if they could understand their language, the iron discipline of the soldiers did not allow them to have any other thoughts. Everyone, quiet down. Just as the 2,000 Mongolian soldiers did not know where to go, a loud Mongolian voice rang out in everyone's ears. Temu rode on his horse like a lion, patrolling its territory, and appeared in front of the surrounded Mongolian soldiers. Behind Temu were 2 other carriages. One of the carriages was filled with a mountain of silver and many iron pots, bowls, and other daily necessities. There were also jars of unopened wine. The other carriage was filled with shiny cavalry swords and sharp feathered bows. There was also black armor that gave off a dark and bloodthirsty glow. The moment the 2 carriages appeared, they attracted the attention of the 2,000 Mongolian soldiers. During the Great Ming dynasty, the Mongolians fought for iron pots because they did not have them. It was not because iron pots were a luxury. Furthermore, the Mongolians did not have the skills and materials to forge iron pots. Without iron pots, they could not cook meat. At that time, the Great Ming dynasty was afraid that the Mongolians would buy iron pots and forge them into weapons. Therefore, the Mongolians could only snatch iron pots. As a result, a group of fully armed Mongolian soldiers would often harass the Han people just to snatch an iron pot. It was quite a comical scene. Temu was a Mongolian. He was very clear about what the Mongolians needed and desired. Instead of trying to persuade or reason with these people, it would be better to give them something tangible and give them what they desired the most. Noticing the greed and excitement in the eyes of the Mongolian cavalryman, Temu knew that he had made the right move. With confidence, he said loudly, "Do you see that? As long as you're willing to surrender and join the 5-star army, all of these things will be yours. Not only that, you'll also be able to receive a decent amount of money every month. If you perform meritorious deeds on the battlefield, you'll even receive additional rewards. It can be said that the 5-star army has many good things that no one can imagine. You are all brave warriors. The 6th young master because he respects you. Of course, if anyone wants to be unconventional and want to repay your Khan's kindness with death, you can also take out your saber and stand out. I will stand right here and will not move an inch. If you have the ability, then just kill me." At this point, Temu took the initiative to pause for a moment before saying, "Of course, you have to think it through before you act. If you draw your sabers, you might die before me. As long as you've made up your mind, you can do it." "Oh, right. I'm afraid you don't know what happened just now. Your Khan Sud fled when he realized that he was no match for my 5-star army. I didn't tell you anything. I have to say, you are all abandoned children. I really feel sorry for you. For a Khan like this, is there any need for you to serve him? Isn't it too worth it?" When Temu finished speaking, there were still a few Mongolian soldiers who wanted to test his saber with their own bodies. Some of them had received Sud's kindness. If it wasn't for this Khan, their lives would be very difficult. However, when they heard the last sentence and heard that Sud had abandoned them, the Mongolian soldiers who wanted to step forward and show their loyalty hesitated. It was not worth it to risk their lives for a Khan who abandoned them. None of the Mongolian soldiers rushed forward. This was within Taimur's expectations. The 5-star army soldiers were all around them. Unless they didn't want to live anymore, who would take the initiative to rush out and die? Good. Since no one objects, I will take it that you have chosen to surrender. Now, I will ask the warriors in the west to throw their weapons on the ground, dismount, and surrender. Everyone else follow. I only want to say that we are very sincere. If anyone wants to play tricks with us, you can try using your own life. After Taimur said this, he looked at the soldiers in the west and said, "You have 3 breaths. If you don't surrender immediately, don't blame us for being impolite." 1, 2. Finally, under Taimur's slow and drawn-out voice, a Mongolian cavalryman threw down the saber in his hand and jumped down from his warhorse. Holding the reins of his warhorse, he was the first to walk out. Surrendering was equivalent to letting go of all their dignity. If it was any other time, who knew how many people would laugh at him? However, they didn't. In the face of life and death, especially when the person they were dying for was not worth it, they wisely chose to survive. Only by surviving would a person have hope, a future, and the possibilities of the future. Riding on the white dragon horse and standing on a pile of rocks, Yang Chendong took in all of this with a natural smile on his face. Beta Persei, come here. Young master. Beta Persei, who was standing at the side, came to Yang Chendong's side. Go ahead and return to the main camp. Tell your logistics team to prepare the food. Also, prepare more silver, wine, cigarettes, and sabers. This young master wants to celebrate. Also, send a telegram to Tsushin City when you return. Tell them to quickly transport the next batch of resources I want. I want as much as you can. Don't think it's too much. Yang Chendong chuckled. Yes, young master. Beta Persei naturally nodded in agreement. However, out of worry, he still asked, Young master, are the resources still being transported by sea? Yes, just like last time. Yang Chendong nodded. After the continuous battles, the strength of the 5-star army had increased tremendously. At this moment, when they were added to the new Urgandusi region, there was naturally nothing to worry about. It would be best if they didn't provoke him. If they dared to provoke him, he didn't mind teaching them how to be an honest person. Beta Persei led a small group of people straight to the main camp. After the Mongolian cavalry put down their weapons, handed over their horses and became infantry, they followed the main force of the 5-star army back to the main camp dozens of miles behind them. At this moment, the sun was about to set and a touch of red hung on the horizon. Looking at this scene, Yang Chendong couldn't help but sing heroically. The sun sets in the west and the red clouds fly in the sky. The soldiers return to the camp from their target practice. The red flowers on their chests reflect. Yang Chendong's singing naturally inspired the 100 black cavalry guards around him. They also sang the song, coming back from target practice. After them, the independent regiment also sang loudly. It was mainly the soldiers from the 6 auxiliary battalions that had already been defeated. When these thousands of people shouted, it caused a huge commotion. It attracted the other regiments and battalions to sing as well. However, they had never heard this kind of military song before. They didn't know what the lyrics were or how to sing it. They could only sing along. Zhuai Feng, Lu Zhua, and Yela's expressions didn't look too good, especially Commander Lu Zhua. He had once been the commander of the auxiliary regiment and taught the soldiers how to sing military songs. But now, not many of his soldiers knew how to sing. He felt his face burning. He thought that after tonight, if he had the chance, he would definitely teach the soldiers how to sing. This would increase the morale of the soldiers and would be extremely useful and beneficial for the unity of the soldiers. Amidst the singing, under the setting sun, the army returned. The army was huge and winding like a dragon that had appeared out of nowhere. It was destined to break the tranquility of the grassland. The main force of the army had finally returned to the main camp. The 3 divisions of the Cold Front finally sent news that they had gone to do some hidden training. As Yang Xie's army continued to grow, as the most elite of the Cold Front division, they also felt the pressure on their bodies increasing. It was also because of this hidden training that they didn't receive news of the army's battle in time. Fortunately, even without the Cold Front division, the 5-star army's strength was already very strong. Especially in this battle, the Nusan cavalry had performed very well. Although they had lost more than 1,000 cavalry in 2 consecutive battles, how could there be no deaths in a battle? Moreover, the number of soldiers that they lost could be re-enlisted from the captives. This was originally what Yang Chendong had promised the regimental commanders. Beta Persei came back early. The logistics battalion had already started cooking. The smell of meat spread everywhere, causing the 5-star army soldiers who had been fighting for a day and night to open their eyes wide. They couldn't help but swallow their saliva. Same old rules. Wash your hands clean before eating. After the meal, we will reward you according to your contributions and distribute the rewards. Yang Chendong boldly leapt onto the white dragon horse and laughed heartily as he spoke. His laughter also attracted the cheers of the soldiers. The meat was large, and there was enough rice. After all, they were still in a state where they could face the enemy at any time. Thus, everyone couldn't drink as much as they wanted. Each person could only drink 2 taels. But even so, many of the soldiers still had a satisfied look on their faces and ate until their mouths were full of oil. And if they could smoke a cigarette after eating, it would definitely be a life comparable to that of a god. Who knew how many soldiers slowly closed their eyes because of this, in a state of enjoyment? Chapter 692. After the 2 battles, they had taken over 1,000 Tatar prisoners and another 3,000 Mongolian prisoners. These 4,000 people were still in the captive camp. They were lucky enough to see the 5-star army having a meal. In that era, it was not easy for soldiers to have a full meal. Usually, they would only have such an opportunity before a great battle, or when they had won a great battle and rewarded the army with a great victory. But even so, not all soldiers were able to enjoy such treatment. Generally speaking, a general would naturally have enough food to eat. The personal guards of the general could eat until they were 70% full, and the regular soldiers, the elites who charged at the front during battle, could eat until they were 60% full. As for the other soldiers, it was already considered good if they could eat until they were 50% full. It was often shown on television that the Mongolian army would eat mutton wherever they went. It was very appetizing. However, that was only for the generals. Normal soldiers could not enjoy such treatment. The soldiers could pick up the leftovers from the general's table. They could even chew on the bones. Normal soldiers could not even think about it. The people of that era were really poor. They only had 2 meals a day. Being able to fill their stomachs was already not bad. However, what they saw today was that almost all of the 5-star army soldiers, no matter if they were generals or normal soldiers, no matter if they were in charge or in charge of logistics, they could all eat until they were full. Even the captives who had not made up their minds had food placed in front of them so that they could eat as much as they wanted. This scene after scene shocked the captives. Some of the Mongolian soldiers who were smart among the captives took the initiative to greet some of the friendly Mongolian soldiers who were also part of the 5-star army. They used the chance to get close to them and asked some questions that they did not understand. All right, we all know what you guys are thinking. Let me tell you, in the 5-star army, as long as we fight and train hard, we do not need to worry about food and drink. Not only that, after we eat and drink, we still have food for our minds. Look, this thing in my hand. Look, it can smoke. It is called a cigarette. What is a cigarette? Is it tasty? The Mongolian captives who saw it for the first time were interested. Of course you can't eat it. This thing is for sucking and smoking. Look at me. While speaking, the soldiers of the 5-star army took a light puff of their cigarettes. Then, they put the cigarette into their mouths. After inhaling a portion of it, they slowly spat out a portion of it. They looked extremely satisfied. Aya, this thing is very interesting. Can you give me one to try? One of the captive soldiers asked curiously. That won't do. This thing isn't for normal use. It can only be earned during military exploits. Hee. In this battle, I killed 4 enemies and injured 1. According to the rules, I can get 45 cigarettes, which is more than 2 packs. If I save some, it will be enough for me to live freely for a while. Ha ha ha. After saying this, the warrior turned around and left. It was as if his spoils of war would be snatched away by the captives if he stayed. One by one, the 5-star army veterans were called over by the captives. After showing off for a while, they turned around and left. Did you think that these veterans were so kind as to chat with the captives? They were only doing so because they had military orders and wanted to satisfy their vanity. However, it was this kind of teaching that greatly stimulated the captives who had no choice but to lower their heads. Originally, they had no choice but to surrender in order to survive. But now, it seemed that there was no harm in surrendering. It might even be a new hope in life. Yang Chendong didn't care about the captives. He firmly believed that the environment could change a person. His attention was focused on the situation in front of him. This time, he had defeated the Mongolian army with a large number of firearms. Presumably, the news of him coming to the prairie could no longer be hidden. In addition, he had defeated Horror's 5,000 cavalry. In the outside world, there should be a lot of people paying attention to him. Since that was the case, he might as well not play hide and seek and stand out. Since he was going to make it public, Yang Chendong decided to take his first step in the prairie and build a city. Regardless of whether it was for the sake of logistical supplies or for the treatment of the injured and the expansion of their influence in the future, a stable city was a must. After standing in front of the sand table for a long time, he pointed to the land of Arakamaki that he had been studying for a long time. Arakamaki, in the Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region, Shi'i and Jiren Gaole. According to Chendi's book, Emperor Taizu wrote, Arakamaki Wandong, Luji Na Tunshin, Mur Sutua, Hahai Laolian, Ajar Havendu, Haleojlu, and other places. Thou shalt reside there. From these records, Arakamaki was located in the easternmost part. Occupying this place was equivalent to having a residence. Moreover, it was also very close to the Biming realm. In the future, no matter where he decided to extend his tentacles, it would be much more convenient. Most importantly, with a foundation, no matter what he did in the future, he would have fewer worries. What kind of people are there in Arakamaki? Pointing to the sand table, Yang Chendong asked Su Yunsheng, who was standing by the side. Reporting to the 6th young master, there are only about 500 Tatar cavalry there. You also know that the relationship between Biming and the Walla is very tense. The closer we get to them, the more scarce our resources are. In order to survive, many of the people here have already moved away. Now, other than the cavalry, there are only about 1,000 Mongolian people. 1,000 people? That's too little. When we need to build a city, I'm afraid we won't even be able to find workers. However, this is the only thing we can do. Right. You've been to Arakamaki, right? How was the environment there? Although Yang Chendong felt a little regretful, how could there be anything perfect in the world? Su Yunsheng hurriedly nodded. Yes, young master, I've been there. There were originally walls there. Later on, when Ming Chengzu went north to conquer the grasslands, it was repaired. The foundation is not bad, and the area it occupies is not small. Once there are enough resources, there shouldn't be a problem to build a large city. Good. Tonight you will lead the reconnaissance team to take over Arakamaki, then announce to the outside world that it is the territory of our mercenaries. Yang Chendong nodded, his aura becoming very firm. He had fought with the Tatar and Mongol tribes separately, and it had attracted the attention of many people. If he did not immediately send troops to take over Arakamaki, even if it was to monitor him, it would be occupied by other forces. At that time, if he wanted to take over Arakamaki, he would have to fall out with one of the parties. Before he had a sufficient foundation, it would be best to avoid war if he could. If the Vala, Tatar, Mongol, or even the northern Ming dynasty allied together to attack him, he was afraid that he would be exhausted to death with the few people he had. Yang Chendong gave the order, and Su Yunsheng did not ask any questions. He nodded and agreed. Yes, after dark, our reconnaissance team will move out. Tomorrow morning, when the sun rises, this news will be spread all over the grasslands. Good, you can go. Call the 3rd Division Commander Wu Shang and Political Commissar Chun Bo over. Yang Chendong did not even raise his head and continued to look at the sand table in front of him as if he had thought of something. After a while, the 2 senior officers of the 3rd Division of the Cold Front appeared in Yang Chendong's tent. How is it? Are you feeling regretful that you didn't get to fight the last battle? As soon as he saw the 2 young officers with the rank of senior colonel, Yang Chendong pointed at them and asked jokingly. Hiding in the grassland was different from hiding in the forest. Without the protection of trees, hiding in the open grassland would naturally require a higher level of training for a cavalry unit to be able to launch a sudden attack. However, under Yang Qindong's theoretical guidance, Wu Shang and Qin Bo still did as they were told. They had already achieved some results. It was still difficult to hide a division in the open grasslands, but it was possible to hide a company or even a battalion. Just think about it. When both sides were about to fight, a powerful enemy cavalry suddenly charged out from the ground. It was self-evident what the outcome of the battle would be. Thus, even though the 3rd Division of the Cold Front didn't make it to the last battle, they did not regret it. This was because they knew that the 6th Young Master's ambitions were far-reaching. There would be more battles to fight in the future. As long as they could train their troops to become stronger, there would be no lack of opportunities for them to perform. There are some regrets, but we believe that gold will shine. The 3rd Division of the Cold Front will always be the strongest cavalry unit. Political Commissar Qin Bo chuckled and said confidently, "Yes, the 3rd Division of the Cold Front will always be the strongest." Commander Wu Sheng said with even more confidence. His expression was filled with determination. Good. Seeing the confidence of his 2 subordinates, Yang Qindong was very happy. His subordinates had to have this kind of spirit. They had to be invincible. Only this kind of army could become a true elite unit. Only this kind of army could win every battle. Yang Qindong was very satisfied with Wu Shang and Chen Bo's attitude. Then, he began to assign tasks. It's like this. This time, I will teach you a very important and difficult mission. Cross the Daxing and Mountain Range, cross the Liao River and Songhua River to reach Hightown. There, you will receive a large amount of military resources from Crimson City and rush back here. Pointing at the location on the sand table, Yang Qindong said, I want the 3rd Division to be like Monkey Sun this time. Create havoc in the sky and make the Baiming army in the new Ergon district not dare to say anything. If they try to stop you, you can use the banner of loyalty. If they still dare to stop you, you can teach them a lesson. How about it? Any questions? Young Master Bin is looking forward to your next performance. Pack up and leave early tomorrow morning. Chun Bo's performance really made Yang Qindong's eyes light up. He even thought that since this person's character was so determined, then he should test him a little more. If there were no problems, then this person could be trained as a military supervisor in the future. It seemed like a waste for such a hot-blooded officer to become a political cadre. Chun Bo didn't know that his performance in Yang Qindong's eyes would give birth to such a realization. After he and Wu Shang gave a standard military salute, he left the command tent and called for an emergency meeting with the officers of the 3 divisions. After the 2 of them left, Yang Qindong's eyes fell on the map again. His eyes still fell on Arikamaki, the old city built by the great Ming dynasty in the grasslands. He imagined that after tonight's reconnaissance battalion took action, this city would belong to him. It would also become his first strong force in the grasslands. At this moment, he even thought of a name for this new city. Since it was going to start here, then it would be called the First City. Arikamaki, this city that had been abandoned by the great Ming dynasty, and who knew how many times it had changed owners, now looked extremely desolate. There were no traces of people walking around in the city at all. Only the dilapidated walls could be seen from time to time, and one could imagine the former glory of this place. It wasn't the first time Su Yunsheng came here, but for tonight's military operation, he once again disguised himself and appeared here. In order to not attract attention, he only brought 2 of his trusted aides and the reconnaissance battalion's 1st company commander, Yin Da battalion commander. There are only 500 enemy cavalry and 1,000 Mongolian civilians. If we want to take over this place, why do we need to be so careful? I just need to move out and the mission will be completed. Yenda was very dissatisfied with the battalion commander's cautiousness. In his view, there was no need to spend so much effort on such a deserted city. Caution is the parent of safety. Su Yunsheng shook his head. Then, as if he thought of something, he looked up at Yenda and said, Commander Yin, people can have pride, but they can't have arrogance. If you continue to look down on everything like this, I will consider transferring you out of the reconnaissance battalion. Su Yunsheng suddenly became serious, and Yenda was really afraid. With his ability, he was more than qualified to be a battalion commander in any regiment. Even if he went to the 3 divisions of the Cold Front, it wouldn't be a problem for him to be a battalion commander. But the position of the reconnaissance battalion was too important. Any battalion commander who wanted to see the 6th young master would be able to see the young master. So, he would rather be a company commander here than go to another unit. This was because he saw the importance of the reconnaissance battalion. Battalion commander, I was wrong. I am actually very careful when doing things. Yende immediately admitted his mistake. In reality, he was a very careful person. Otherwise, he wouldn't have become the company commander of the reconnaissance battalion's 1st company. Naturally, Su Yunsheng was someone who understood this principle, so he just reminded the other party. If he was really not satisfied, he wouldn't have reminded him and would have directly transferred him away. With the interlude just now, when Su Yunsheng wanted to do something, Yende just followed at the side and didn't say anything. The 4 of them walked like this and unknowingly came to a house in the city. Here, they saw an old man resting outside the door. Looking at the old man's appearance, he was in his 50s. At that time, he was already considered a very old man. Haha, old brother. How old are you? Su Yunsheng had imprinted almost every corner of the city and every street in his mind. He had basically completed his mission and wanted to take a rest. When he saw the old man, he walked over without thinking and asked in Mongolian. He sat down beside the old man. The old man had already noticed Su Yunsheng and the other 3. Seeing them sit down beside him, he wasn't surprised. Instead, he smiled and answered, "This old man is 56 this year." "Oh, that's still a very old man," Su Yunsheng said casually. "You can say that." The old man chuckled. His face was filled with reminiscence, and the vicissitudes of life were written all over his face. Seeing that the old man seemed to be reminiscing about something, Su Yunsheng didn't disturb him. Instead, he reached into his bosom and took out a piece of dried meat that he always carried with him. He also took out a bottle of old wine from the hands of 2 bodyguards and placed it in front of the old man. If you want to get what you want from others, you have to pay first. This was what Yang Qindong always said. Now, the scouts who were good at gathering information had learned most of it. The wine and meat that was suddenly placed in front of him made the old man, who was originally sitting at the door basking in the sun, stunned. Then, the way he looked at Su Yunsheng and the other 3 changed. Allowing the old man to size them up in front of him, Su Yunsheng only smiled and didn't say anything. But unexpectedly, the old man suddenly said, "Although you are dressed like Mongolians, but if this old man didn't guess wrongly, you should be people of the Ming dynasty and soldiers of the Ming dynasty." Suddenly being exposed, the faces of Yende and the 2 bodyguards couldn't help but tighten. They even instinctively wanted to pull out their swords to silence the old man. On the other hand, Su Yunsheng's expression didn't change, and his heart didn't beat fast. He casually raised his arm and stopped the actions of the 3 bodyguards. He smiled and looked at the old man and asked, "But I don't know why old brother thinks so." The old man didn't seem to notice the actions of the 3 bodyguards. He casually smiled and said, "Only people of the Ming dynasty who understand etiquette would treat guests like this. If you were really Mongolians, you definitely wouldn't be so polite to this old man." So it was because he was too polite that it aroused the suspicion of the other party. Su Yunsheng reflected in his heart. Should the scouts learn to be more domineering when they go out to do things in the future? While his heart was still thinking about this unintentional loophole, the old man spoke again. "Although your Mongolian can be considered authentic, but let's talk in Chinese." AI, speaking of which, I haven't spoken Chinese in a long time. "Oh, old brother is also a Han?" Su Yunsheng's interest was immediately piqued. After all, other than his comrades, to be able to meet a fellow Han here was still very delightful. "I can be considered half Han. My father was a Ming dynasty man. Later on, he met a grassland woman and settled down here, giving birth to me," the old man said somewhat embarrassedly. After all, in that era, if one's blood wasn't pure, then one was a mixed blood. People would look down on them. "I see." Su Yunsheng didn't have any intention of looking down on the old man. On the contrary, he was very curious about the old man's behavior in front of him. He had a feeling that this old man had some stories. "Old brother, I wonder if you can tell me your name?" Name? The old man said meaningfully. Then, he sank into his memories for a while before saying, "This old man's Mongolian name is Zhang Shibao. Han name is Zhang Shibao? So it's Old Master Zhang. Nice to meet you." Su Yunsheng very politely clasped his fist and didn't mention the old man's Mongolian name. He only said that it was a Han name to express a kind of closeness. Then, he said something that shocked Yenda and the two bodyguards behind him. "This little one's name is Su Yunsheng. I'm the battalion commander of the mercenary scouts under the Duke of Loyalty." Su Yunsheng actually directly revealed his identity. This was definitely not allowed by the rules of the scouts. Unless it was one of their own, as a scout, he absolutely couldn't reveal his identity. As the battalion commander, it was impossible for Su Yunsheng not to know this. But he still did so. Naturally, Yenda and the two bodyguards were puzzled and puzzled. Chapter 694. Naturally, Su Yunsheng had his own reasons for saying this. First, he found that this old man named Zhang Shibao was very honest. Otherwise, even if he saw through it, there was no need to say it. Because sometimes, a wrong word could cost one's life. Secondly, he felt that Zhang Shibao still had a good impression of him, or rather, of Ming Ran. Third, even if he made a wrong judgment, he was confident that he could make the other party stay and not let the news of him appearing here spread. Since that was the case, there was no harm in directly revealing his identity. It had to be said that Su Yunsheng's courage was quite big, and this time, he made the right bet. Just after he reported his true identity, Zhang Shibao changed his unhurried expression and suddenly said with a shocked expression, "The Duke of Loyalty and Courage of the great Ming dynasty? Is it the Duke of Loyalty who is known as the God of War and defeated the great army?" Zhang Shibao also knew the name of the God of War. At that time, Yang Chendong had won against Mini and defeated Yi Xian. Because of this, his name was spread throughout the Mongolian grasslands. It was normal for Zhang Shibao, who had Han blood, to know about it.
Yes.
When Su Yunsheng answered this question, he was also very formal, and his expression was very respectful. It was like the officials of the Ming dynasty were respectful when talking about the emperor. Is it really? The God of War is coming to the grassland? Zhang Shibao was a little excited. He stretched out his arm and grabbed Su Yunsheng's arm. Yes, the God of War is not only coming to the grassland, but he also wants to build a city here. He wants to change the pattern of war here. He wants to create better living conditions for the Han people here. And Argamaki is his next target. He wants to occupy this place and rebuild it. At that time, you will be very happy to live here. Su Yunsheng felt that Zhang Shibao was really excited, so he simply told him about his mission and Yang Chendong's current goal. It seemed to be a secret, but after tonight, everyone would know that Yang Chendong had occupied Arakamaki. It was no longer a secret. Su Yunsheng told the truth, which surprised Zhang Shibao and made him very excited. Good, that's great." After saying good 3 times in a row, Zhang Shibao's eyes actually held a trace of tears. Obviously, this news really made him very excited. Su Yunsheng was also excited and happy as if he had been infected. Look, this was what the people wanted. The 6th young master hadn't done anything yet, but his appearance had already made an old man like Zhang Shibao so happy. Once a big city was built here, there would be even more people who would be happy. Once he had the support of the people, what was there to worry about? That's right. With the arrival of the war god, the future of the Han people will be much better. As long as they abide by the law, they will be able to live a better life than before. This should be what everyone wants to see. Su Yunsheng nodded and continued with the idea of praising the 6th young master. Zhang Shibao's eyes lit up when he heard that. Then, he repeated thoughtfully, "Can the Han people really live a good life?" Of course. You don't understand the war god. He has always been merciful to his enemies, but he is very good to the Han people. I'm afraid you still don't know that the former Jiaoji and Lansong kingdoms are now under the rule of the war god. The Han people there received a large amount of land, and their lives are better than before by 100 times. If you have the chance to go there and take a look, you will see that the Han people's faces are filled with all sorts of smiles. That is happiness from the bottom of their hearts. A large amount of land that belongs to them, Zhang Shibao continued to repeat. His eyes revealed a look of yearning. Yinda and the two soldiers saw this and couldn't help but feel happy. This was because they also had a part to play in this matter. Just when the five of them were immersed in the hope of a beautiful future, Zhang Shibao's thoughts suddenly returned to reality. He looked at Su Yunsheng and said, "You guys should be here to act as the vanguard and prepare to occupy this place. Have you guys thought of how to deal with the Mongol cavalry? Also, how can we prevent them from destroying the spring in their desperation?" Su Yunsheng was about to confidently say that it was just 500 unguarded cavalry. Their reconnaissance unit would naturally be able to take them down easily. However, when he suddenly heard about the spring, his face was still filled with shock. Spring? What spring? You guys don't know? Zhang Shibao also looked at Su Yunsheng and the other three with a puzzled expression. I really don't know. Please tell me, Elder Zhang. Su Yunsheng's face was a little red as he lowered his head. Speaking of which, although the reconnaissance unit was powerful, it wasn't as pervasive as the security bureau. In addition, Yang Qindong had just given the order to take down Alakumaki, so it was reasonable that he didn't fully understand the situation here. This, actually, is not a big secret. However, not many people know about it. Alakumaki City, there is a spring here. It is also because of this that the problem of water source is solved. This is also the main reason why the great Ming dynasty chose to build a city here. Otherwise, wouldn't it be too troublesome to transport water from the Woolaga River? There are only about 1,000 people here. There are indeed 500 Tatar cavalrymen guarding this place. In fact, they are guarding this water source. Every half a month or so, the Tatar army will come here with water carts to collect water. The 500 cavalrymen here are prepared for this. From Zhang Shibao's words, Su Yunsheng learned of another big matter. He also knew that tomorrow, the Tatar army would come to collect water. This unexpected news shocked Su Yunsheng. He suddenly felt that he knew too little about this place. Even if it was because this was the first time they came here, even if it was because they hadn't come here the last time the Tatar army came to collect water, these were not the reason. The most fatal reason was that he didn't know enough. His meeting with Zhang Shibao was just a coincidence. However, he unexpectedly received this news, which was enough to make Su Yunsheng feel that this trip was not in vain. If not for this matter, he would have brought the scouts here. It was very likely that he would have given the Tatar cavalry a chance to destroy the water source and the spring. Once they poisoned it, who knew how long it would take for the spring to be digested and for the people to drink it with ease? After Zhang Shibao knew that Su Yunsheng represented the god of war, he told him everything. When it was almost dusk, Su Yunsheng left. Before he left all the food on him as a sign of gratitude and asked Zhang Shibao to keep this a secret. The four of them left Alakumaki as though they were passing by. Because there were only 4 of them, even if the Tatar cavalry in the city saw them, they didn't pay much attention. This was because, strictly speaking, Alakumaki wasn't under anyone's influence and no one wanted to forcibly occupy this place. After Su Yunsheng and the other 3 left Alakumaki, they immediately rushed to the command center. After dinner, they appeared in the headquarters. Su Yunsheng hurriedly went to the command center to meet Yang Qindong. The matter of the spring was also somewhat out of Yang Qindong's expectations. Before this, he didn't receive any relevant information. But now that he knew, it was naturally a good thing. Previously, he was still thinking that once the first city was built, it would be troublesome to obtain water from the Woolaga River. He was even thinking about digging a canal. Now that he knew that there was a spring in the city, and according to Zhang Shibao's words, the spring seemed to be quite big. In the past, when Alakumaki had a population of tens of thousands, it wasn't difficult to supply water. This was equivalent to a gift from the heavens. We must protect the safety of the spring. How about this? Arrange the Wolfang special forces to complete this task. Your scouts only need to follow the plan and do what you want. As for the water-fetching team sent by the Tatar army tomorrow, leave it to Tiger's Main's independent regiment. They just changed from infantry to cavalry and can be used to train the troops. Yang Qindong made a decision after thinking for a while. Su Yunsheng quickly left, along with the Wolfang special forces led by Tiger's Main. As the military system continued to expand, the strength of the army also continued to increase. The mission of the Wolfang special forces had already changed. In Yang Qindong's words, their mission was mainly to carry out beheading operations and special undercover missions. This time, protecting the spring in Alakumaki City belonged to the undercover mission. After receiving the military order, Tiger's Mane quietly set off with a group of members. This night for Alakumaki City was no different from any other night. When night fell, the city became quiet as usual. Apart from the 100 cavalrymen who were responsible for the normal night patrol, there was not a sound to be heard. Perhaps it was because no one had any ideas about this place for a long time. Or perhaps it was because there was simply no place worth other people's attention. In short, the 100 cavalrymen patrolling would only make a symbolic trip once every 2 hours. Then, they would gather at a lit bonfire in the city to rest their feet. An almost abandoned city, a city without many citizens, a city without many resources, a city without a very good geographical location. If not for the existence of a thick spring, which could still be considered useful, there would not even be 500 cavalrymen. How could such a place have a heavy military force, and how could it be so tightly guarded? Therefore, when Tiger's Mane brought a group of Special Forces members into this place, they did not encounter any obstruction at all. They followed the map that Su Yunxing obtained from Elder Zhang Shibao and rushed to the spring. Chapter 695. The mouth of the spring was located in the middle of a courtyard that was not small. Rather than calling it the mouth of the spring, it would be more accurate to call it a well. Just beside the mouth of the spring, there was a pond in the courtyard. It was already filled with water and looked extremely clear. At night, a bright moon hung upside down in the water, giving people the feeling that they could fish the moon out of the water. Tai Hu and the others came to the high wall beside the small courtyard from all directions. Each of them was like a nimble fox, not making any sound or movement. After they observed closely from the surrounding rooftops, they noticed that there were dozens of breathing sounds coming from the row of houses beside the pond. Some were light, some were heavy, but most of them seemed to have entered a state of sleep. Since Zhang Shibao said that the Tatar cavalry might drug the mouth of the spring and destroy the water quality here, Tai Hu and the others had to be prepared. With a signal, the 20 members divided into different directions and began to divide the work. Some of them continued to monitor with their guns, some began to enter the small courtyard or the various exits near the mouth of the spring, and some had already jumped off the rooftops and approached the row of houses where the breathing sounds were coming from. Skinny Monkey was the most agile member. He was the first to arrive in front of the houses. Unknowingly, a weapon similar to a modern grenade had appeared in his hand. This was not a normal grenade, but a smoke bomb. Once it was fired, it would release a pungent smell, causing people to lose their ability to judge for a certain period of time and lose more than 70% of their mobility. Skinny Monkey was the first to arrive, followed by King Kong, Violent Ape, and the others. Each of them guarded a door, holding a smoke bomb in their hands. When all of them were in place, they looked at each other and 6 smoke bombs were suddenly thrown from the windows into the 6 rooms. In the silent night, the smoke bombs made a sound in unison. Oh, puff, ah, choke. About 4 to 5 seconds later, there were bursts of shouts, curses, and screams coming from the houses. These sounds should have been like thunder in the silent night, but the sound of the cavalry charging at the city gate covered everything, so the sounds made here did not attract too much attention from the outside. Even though no one was paying attention, it didn't mean that the members of the special forces would go easy on them. On the contrary, their attacks began at the same time. The smoke grenades emitted a pungent smell, causing the Tatar cavalry to rush out of their rooms. Then, like dumplings, they were knocked out one after another. There were only 6 rooms, but 50 Tatar cavalry rushed out of them. In the end, apart from 2 people who resisted fiercely and suffered light injuries, the other 48 people were knocked out before they could even figure out what had happened. Search. After taking control of the situation, Iron Tiger gave the order. The members of Wolf Fong worked together and quickly found a large amount of poison in the room. Among them, they found a lot of arsenic, nux vomica, and other things. These things melted in water, and after being consumed, they would appear to be poisoned. It was hard to imagine what would have happened if Su Yunxing hadn't found out about it. If the mercenaries didn't know that the water source had been destroyed, what would have happened after the army drank the water? Come, bring the 2 wounded over here and let them drink the water in this pool. Iron Tiger was shocked and a little angry. Looking at the 2 wounded Tatar cavalry, he couldn't help but feel angry. If the 6th young master hadn't said that building the city required too much manpower, he would have killed them. But he could avoid the death penalty, so let them taste the water. If there really was a problem, they could only blame their bad luck. There was no time to poison them, or it could be said that they didn't think that someone would target them, so there was naturally no problem with the water. The 2 Tatar cavalry calmly drank the water. Seeing that everyone was safe, Iron Tiger let out a sigh of relief. He ordered his men to guard this place and not allow anyone to come close without orders. On the streets of Arakamaki, the sounds of killing had already become one. When the appointed time arrived, the cavalry of the reconnaissance unit began their attack. The first to be attacked were the 100 Tatar cavalry responsible for tonight's night watch. They thought that it would be an ordinary night like any other, but no one expected that the enemy would suddenly appear. While they were still far away, the sound of arrows piercing through the air could be heard. Most of the Tatar cavalry didn't even have time to react before they were injured. A few of the cavalry reacted faster. They had just mounted their horses when they were surrounded by at least 3 or 4 scouts. After a round of wild attacks, they were injured and fell off their horses. Yenda was responsible for leading a company of scouts to deal with the sleeping Tatar cavalry. Even though Yenda only had 100 soldiers under him, they had attacked suddenly, taking advantage of the element of surprise. By the time Yenda launched his attack, most of the enemies were unarmed. The result of this battle was naturally easy for Yenda to take down the enemy easily. This battle really wasn't worth writing about. The enemy's strength was weak. If they were strong soldiers, they wouldn't have been assigned to guard a meaningless city. It was another surprise attack. From the beginning to the end of the battle, less than an hour had passed. Of the 500 Tatar cavalrymen, only 4 were killed because of their fierce resistance, and 30 were lightly injured in the resistance. The rest were all alive. Arakamaki had changed hands at this moment. A shining signal flare rose into the sky. Yang Chendong, who was waiting in the distance, led the main army to move towards Arakamaki. From today onwards, the first city that was under construction would become their headquarters in the north. The 3 divisions of the Cold Front Division didn't go with the main army to the future first city. Instead, after a good night's rest, the army suddenly retreated east the next morning, heading towards the Noob Urgandusi region. They had a new mission, to open up a new logistical supply line. If anyone dared to threaten them on this road, they would end up dead under their spears and swords. Arakamaki had changed hands. The delay in the news and the fact that none of the 500 Tatar cavalry had a chance to escape caused this news to be completely sealed and not spread. Outside the city, the Tatar team sent out to pull water appeared. At that time, the grassland was still very rich in water plants. There was no environmental pollution, and because of the small population, it was not wantonly exploited. In fact, there was no shortage of water sources. It was just that the spring water in Arakamaki city was better and more delicious. Therefore, some Tatar nobles were still very used to drinking the water here, and there was a matter of fetching water once every half a month. Not only was the water quality of the spring good, but the amount of water was also sufficient. No one knew where it was connected to, but it gave people a feeling of inexhaustible. Every time, the caravan that came to fetch water became very large. Looking at the place where the independent regiment was lying in ambush, the number of caravans was more than 200. It could be said to be majestic, like a long dragon. Wow, what a huge team. Using binoculars, Tiger Mane saw the approaching caravan from afar and sighed. At the same time, his eyes were shining. He was afraid that there would not be many people coming. If that was the case, there would be no meaning in fighting. Reporting to Commander, the scouts report that the enemy has a total of 200 carriages, 5,000 civilians, and about 1,000 cavalry. Deputy Commander Xian Honghai lowered his voice and came to Tiger Mane's side to report. Xian Honghai, the deputy commander of the independent regiment, was from Chichen City. He had been an auxiliary soldier, cold front squad leader, platoon leader, and company commander. Later, because of his courage and calmness, He was chosen by Yang Chendong and transferred to the independent regiment to assist Tiger Main in his daily work. Because of Tiger Main's multiple identities, when he was not around, Xian Honghai was mainly responsible for the regiment's work. Only 1,000 cavalry? Tiger Main, who was originally eager to give it a try, was like a deflated balloon. His fighting spirit was reduced by half in an instant. He originally thought that it would be the enemy cavalry, but he did not expect that there would be 5,000 civilians. In this way, this battle really did not have much of a start. If they were not evenly matched, it would not show the strength of the independent regiment, right? This was the difference between mercenaries and other armies. Other people were afraid that the opponent was too strong and would be dangerous when fighting. However, when it came to mercenaries, they despised the opponent for being too one-sided. It would not be satisfying to fight, and it would not show their strength. With only 1,000 cavalry opponents, Tiger Main felt dispirited. When he looked at Xian Honghai, who was unusually excited, he decided to do him a favor. All right, Deputy Commander Xian, the command of this battle will be handed over to you. But remember, the 5,000 civilians cannot be hurt. Young Master wants to build Sure City, so he needs a lot of manpower. These are all good laborers. Understood. Please rest assured, Commander. Xian Honghai patted his chest and said with a face full of assurance. Then, he turned around and left, as if he was afraid that Tiger Main would change his mind if he stayed any longer. Tiger Main was Yang Chendong's subordinate, so naturally, he did not have to worry about being promoted. Xian Honghai had relied on his own hard work and ability to get to where he was today. Although he was only in his early 20s and could be considered a relatively young deputy commander, since he was born in the cold front, the world in his heart was much bigger than that of ordinary people. His dreams were also much broader. After receiving the military order, Xian Honghai immediately called over the 10 battalion commanders who had just been reorganized from infantry to cavalry. Commander has already handed the battle mission to me. Now, I order each battalion to send out 100 cavalrymen to attack the enemy's cavalry with me. The other cavalrymen will be responsible for guarding the 5,000 civilians pulling the water wheel. Since the enemy only had 1,000 cavalrymen, in order to train the ability of his subordinates, he naturally would not send out too many cavalrymen. Only when the number of soldiers was equal could it be a form of training. A battalion had 400 people, but only 100 of them could go out. This made the 10 battalion commanders somewhat unhappy. 2 of the young and energetic battalion commanders clamored that they would send out their own battalion to ensure that they could deal with the enemy's 1,000 cavalrymen. Chapter 696. It was naturally a good thing for the officers to have strong confidence. However, this wasn't the time to flaunt their heroism. How could Xian Honghai agree to this? With one sentence, if anyone dared to speak out of turn, even the mission of 100 men would be cancelled. Sure enough, the battalion commanders became well-behaved. So be it, it was better than not sending anyone. The battalion commanders followed Xian Honghai's instructions with the idea of training their fighting spirit through actual combat. They picked out a group of 100 men with average strength and gathered a total of 1,000 men to hand over to the deputy commander. What was worth mentioning was that the officer leading each battalion was actually a battalion commander, and all of them held official positions. Xian Honghai naturally noticed this scene, but he didn't say anything. The officers below also wanted to go on the battlefield and kill the enemy. He naturally couldn't refuse. After all, wasn't he also leading the troops? The caravan in the distance was getting closer and closer. It could already be seen that the 5,000 men driving the caravan were all dejected and dispirited. Even the 1,000 cavalrymen were walking sparsely. There wasn't the slightest bit of vigilance and formation that a cavalry troop should have. Although it could be said that the grasslands were currently in chaos, there was war everywhere. Many people were still fine when they left home in the morning, but who knew if this would be the last time they left home? However, in the face of danger, no one would have the idea of taking the water caravan. It was simply too worthless. It was too much of a loss to pay the price for these things. Even the common people knew that they shouldn't do things that were unprofitable, let alone a cavalry troop. Therefore, when the independent regiment suddenly appeared and Xian Honghai led 1,000 cavalrymen to kill from the side, The 1,000 Tatar cavalrymen looked at them as if they hadn't woken up from a dream. They looked at them as if they were looking at an idiot. It was as if they were saying, "Are you kidding me? We're just a caravan. You want to steal from us?" Enemy attack! Enemy attack! The leading Tatar Chiliarch only stared blankly for a moment before he reacted. He then pulled out his saber and shouted loudly. He intended to summon the morale of the army back in the shortest time possible. Kill. At this moment, Xian Honghai and his 1,000 cavalrymen were already less than 150 meters away from the Tatar cavalrymen. As the general leading the team, he shouted as he took out his bow and shot an arrow at the nearest target. He didn't use a flintlock because Xian Honghai didn't think it was necessary. Since they were cavalrymen, archery was still the best choice for long-range weapons. This was also a form of training for the troops. Following Xian Honghai's arrow, the countless independent cavalry around him also knocked their bows and shot forward. Dozens of Tatar cavalrymen had nowhere to hide and were hit by the arrows and fell from their horses. However, even more of the Tatar cavalry managed to escape with the speed of their horses. At the same time, they began to shoot arrows, threatening and killing the opposing cavalry. The cavalry of the independent regiment was made up of the original auxiliary soldiers and the captive soldiers of the Ming army of New Urgandusi. Among them, it wasn't that they didn't have horse-riding skills in the past. They were just ordinary soldiers who hadn't undergone strict training. For an army like this, even if they were given healthy horses, it would still be difficult for them to display the true advantage of cavalry. Because of this, the weakness of the independent regiment was revealed when they shot arrows. Facing the Tatar cavalrymen who grew up on horseback, both sides shot at each other. After a short while, the unprepared Tatar cavalryman began to gain the upper hand. Out of the corner of his eyes, he saw his own soldiers being shot by arrows or falling off their horses. In a short period of time, about 100 people were injured or died in battle. Xian Honghai clenched his teeth in heartache. He finally realized that his cavalry was still lacking in many aspects. "No, we can't go on like this," a voice sounded in his mind. Xian Honghai was very clear about the strength of his cavalry. Most of them were like ducks being forced to perch on a perch. They lacked the time to break in with their horses and the time to train on horseback, especially when it came to archery. Whether it was shooting moving targets or moving arrows, they were still very weak. It was expected that cavalry would be at a disadvantage when shooting at each other. Rome wasn't built in a day. Powerful military combat ability wasn't something that could be trained in a single battle. In order to reduce losses, the soldiers had to have more opportunities to train and survive. Xian Honghai made a decision. He shouted loudly, "All battalion commanders, charge with me! Close combat!" With Xian Honghai as the leader, he brought 10 battle-hardened battalion commanders to close in on the Tatar cavalrymen from all directions. Under their lead, more and more soldiers stopped taking out their bows and followed behind the officer. They dodged the arrows and closed in on the enemy cavalrymen. Tiger's Mane was looking at everything that was happening in the distance through his binoculars. His expression was stern. When the 6th young master said that he wanted to give this mission to them to train and strengthen the ability of the independent regiment to fight on horseback, he was still a little unconvinced. Previously, their independent regiment had used infantry to defeat cavalry at the short stone pile. Now that they were cavalry, how could they not defeat cavalry? Reality gave Tiger's Mane a big slap in the face. Only now did he understand that their previous victory was only due to the power of the Type 81 assault rifle. When they gave up on using firearms, their independent regiment was nothing. "Commander, the situation with Vice Commander Xian is not good. Should we send the cavalry battalion?" Another cavalry battalion commander of the independent regiment asked worriedly. The independent regiment had 10 cavalry battalions that were reorganized from infantry. Apart from them, there were 6 other cavalry regiments. In comparison, these 6 cavalry regiments were much stronger. Although they couldn't compare to the Nusan cavalry, they had the advantage of numbers. Dealing with 1,000 Tatar cavalrymen wasn't a problem. Clenching his right fist, Tiger's Mane was a little tempted. His breathing became a little heavier. But after a while, he exhaled and said, "No need. An army has to go through hardships and risks in the end. If they are always under protection, this kind of army will never be strong. Tiger's Mane didn't order the main force to go out and help. This was because he knew that an army that hadn't undergone a transformation wasn't a strong army. It was also because he believed in his vice commander, Xian Honghai. He believed that he would be able to obtain the final victory. Not letting Tiger's Mane down, Xian Honghai really did give up on long-range attacks when he discovered that the situation wasn't good. He changed to close combat. He relied on the incomparably sharp saber in his hand to shorten the gap between the two sides. When Xian Honghai brought his 10 battalion commanders to the front of the Tatar cavalry, the saber in his hand continuously swung down. The enemy's cavalry formation that had just gathered was scattered. The advantage of archery was suppressed. Taking advantage of this opportunity, more and more of the independent regiment's cavalry rushed over. The situation began to turn in their favor. The soldiers of the independent regiment couldn't be more familiar with the saber training. When they didn't have war horses, one of the things they had to do every day was to hack their saber 1,000 times a day. Because of this, countless soldiers' right arms swelled up. Some even fainted on the training ground. Their hard work finally paid off. Under the supervision and urging of their commander, Tiger's Mane, vice commander, Xian Honghai, and other officers, the soldiers swung their sabers quickly and powerfully. Now that they had changed to close combat, their hard work finally paid off. Ding ding dang dang. The sound of metal colliding rang out. Weapons collided with weapons, and the two sides that were previously suppressed entered a stalemate. This stalemate didn't last long. As the sabers continued to collide, cracks began to appear on the sabers of the Tatar cavalry. The quality of the weapons became the biggest factor that affected the outcome of the battle. Finally, after 7 or 8 clashes, the sabers in the hands of the Tatar cavalry began to break more and more. Both sides were riding horses, both were cavalry, and both sides were moving at the same speed. One side had weapons, while the other side only had a broken saber that couldn't threaten the life of the other side. The result was already predetermined. Retreat. Seeing the sabers in their hands break one after another, the arrogant Tatar cavalry's expression changed greatly. They turned around and fled. They had already seen 200 water carts and 5,000 civilians being controlled by the enemy. Knowing that the difference in numbers was too great, they finally decided to retreat. They had to inform the generals of this news. The Tatar cavalry fled. They used horse riding skills that were more skillful than the independent regiment's cavalry to escape. All that was left for Xian Honghai and the others were the horses' tails and the backs of the Tatar cavalry. Although the Tatar cavalry fled and the independent regiment seemed to have won, when the final statistics were tallied, they discovered that they had lost more than 100 soldiers and more than 300 were injured. However, the number of enemy cavalry that remained was less than 200. This was the first time since the establishment of the mercenary regiment that they had such a ratio of battle results and casualties. Of course, this was the first time that the results were the worst. Because of this, Xian Honghai brought 10 battalion commanders and more than 800 cavalrymen, who were either injured or uninjured, to the commander of Tiger Brilliance and asked for forgiveness. You don't need to ask for forgiveness from me. You should ask for forgiveness from the more than 100 comrades that have already died. With the same number of soldiers, you suddenly killed your way out and took the initiative. However, the battle was actually so tragic. You can conclude it yourselves. Tiger's man said with a cold face. After saying this, he brought the 200 water carts and the 5,000 civilians that he had just captured and headed to the beginning city. As the commander of the independent regiment, he had to bear the main responsibility for today's battle. He had to personally ask for forgiveness in front of the 6th young master. Aramadki had been officially renamed as the beginning city by Yang Chundong. After the name change, the city seemed to be glowing with youth. The city was bustling with activity. Chapter 697. Under Yang Chindong's orders, a large number of trees and stones were carried into the city. Temporary houses were either reinforced or uprooted from the ground. Since they were going to choose this place as their base camp, they naturally had to build a place for the army to live. Rows of brave cavalrymen dismounted from their war horses and became construction workers to build their own homes. Not only them, But the thousands of people in the city were also busy. Among them, except for the children, everyone else joined the army to build the city. The old men and young men worked with the mercenary soldiers and could earn 1 or 2 taels of silver every day. This was naturally a great temptation for them. Even the women entered the logistics camp to help cook. In this way, not only could they eat 3 meals in the army, but they could also earn half a tael of silver a day. This was an unprecedented good thing. For the thousands of people in the city, silver was a very distant thing. They almost did not have an impression of it. The daily necessities were the men hunting and the women mending clothes. They were barely able to survive and not starve to death. But now, the appearance of the mercenary army gave them new hope. They were already fantasizing that with enough silver, one day, they could buy the good things that they had always wanted to buy but did not dare to buy. Perhaps when that day came, they would also be able to live a decent life. Yang Chendong had never lacked silver. The creativity of Crimson City had surpassed any force. The Outer Heaven Trading Company had also become the richest trading company in the world. The rare goods from their hands had now been circulated to the 5 continents and 8 places. Even among some unfriendly forces, they did not openly exclude Yang Xie's goods. After all, there were some things that even the aristocrats and royalty liked. Once they were openly excluded, they would no longer be able to get the goods that they liked and the items that could make their quality of life reach a higher standard. As the saying went, it was easy to do things with silver. Yang Chendong firmly believed that when a large sum of silver was spent, it would attract more people to come to the beginning city, either to work or to settle here. It would not be long before this place would become a big city, a strong city. Since it was called First City, Yang Chendong had a certain idea and hope in his heart. He wanted to build this city into one of the largest cities in the vicinity. In order to achieve this goal, he had to expand the original area of the city to more than 10 times its original size. This required an astronomical number of workers. Just as he was thinking about the lack of manpower, Tiger's Mane arrived. Yang Chendong laughed heartily when he heard that. Very good. Arrange for them to start working immediately. All right, in order to let them put in all their strength to the maximum, you can tell them that if they perform well, not only will they regain their freedom, but they will also be paid several times more than outside. Yang Chendong seemed to be in a good mood. When Tiger's Mane agreed, he took the opportunity to talk about the performance of the independent cavalry on the battlefield. In the end, he even took the initiative to reflect on himself, saying that he had failed in his leadership and asked for punishment. The 10 cavalry battalions that were established after the independent regiment were not trained by Tiger's Mane. They were just ordinary soldiers from the Biming Guards. In terms of military quality, they could only be said to be average. If not for the fact that he did not want to reveal his identity and whereabouts at that time, he was afraid that these people would have been released at that time. However, since they had stayed for such a long time, and after they understood the situation of the mercenaries, they also wanted to join. Yang Chendong naturally could not refuse. This gave them the opportunity to enlist in the army and even become a glorious cavalry. However, a weak foundation was a weak foundation. This was an indisputable fact. This battle had already exposed too many of their weaknesses and shortcomings. Normally, if it were any other general, they would have given up on this kind of army. After all, training a qualified cavalry required a lot of energy and financial resources. Even training an excellent cavalry required more time and effort than training 5 infantrymen. However, since they were fated to join the mercenary army, Yang Chendong couldn't just leave them be, based on the principle of not giving up on them. After thinking for a while, he took the initiative to say, "How about this? I will give you a month. In this month, unless the situation is urgent, I will not arrange any combat missions for these 10 battalions. After a month, there will be an assessment. Those who pass can stay, and those who do not pass will be given a toll to leave the army." No matter what, these cavalry soldiers were still Han disciples. Just based on this point, Yang Chendong was worthy of giving them a chance. Tiger's Mane was originally worried that the 6th young master would be angry at their failure to fight and directly dismiss the soldiers who had just become cavalry soldiers. After all, in the army, survival of the fittest was too common. If that was the case, as the commander of the independent regiment, he could not say anything. Fortunately, The sixth young master still remembered their old friendship and promised to give his brothers a chance to become stronger. He immediately respectfully saluted. "Thank you, young master. I thank you on behalf of the 4,000 brothers." Haha. Seeing that Tiger's mane was sincerely thanking him, Yang Qindong's expression turned serious and said, "What I want is not gratitude. I want them to stay after a month." Yes. Tiger's mane saluted again and decided by vote. The order was passed to the army. When the 10 new cavalry battalions of the independent regiment heard the final decision of the sixth young master, many people's eyes were bloodshot. They knew that the best and possibly the last opportunity in their lives had come. An opportunity that could change their lives had come. Perhaps in the past, their abilities were really ordinary, or could even be described as very weak. But that was only because of the military rules. In that kind of environment where everyone was just muddling along, even if you wanted to show off, there was no chance, let alone any conditions. Think about it. An army that could barely fill their stomachs. What kind of strong combat power could they rely on? But now, their eating, drinking, and pooping were not a problem. They did not even need to build a city like the 2 reinforced cavalry regiments and the Nusan cavalry regiment. Instead, they only needed to focus on training. In such an environment, if they still couldn't raise their strength within a month, then they were really trash. They really didn't deserve anyone's sympathy and understanding. Although they still could not be like the Nusan cavalry regiment in a month's time, they were at least stronger than ordinary cavalry and reached the standard of second-class cavalry. With this belief, the independent regiment went out of the city to train every day at dawn. They would only return when the sky was completely dark and they could not see. Then, after dragging their tired bodies to eat a full meal, they quickly entered the temporary barracks to rest. They trained for at least 12 hours every day, but no one complained about being tired. They were all working hard to change themselves and improve themselves. The independent regiment was changing at an astonishing speed. Just like them, the beginning city was also changing day by day. When the simple barracks were built, Yang Qindong gave another order. Some of the old houses in the city were demolished one after another. The stones and wood that were taken down were used to build the outer city wall. In Yang Qindong's eyes, most of the original buildings in the city were not up to standard. Not only were their houses built simply and not sturdy enough, but even the layout was too messy. The streets were too narrow, and there was no planning. No matter how big the territory of such a city was and how many people it had, it still gave people the feeling that it was extremely backward. Since the city was named by him, it had to look like a big city. For a time, the city began to become empty. More and more uninhabited houses in the city were demolished to build the big city wall. In this manner, after merely 10 days had passed, there was an additional solid outer city that was 6 to 7 miles long outside of the beginning city. Looking from afar, it had a trace of majestic appearance, and the embryonic form of a large city was beginning to appear. The movement in the beginning city naturally attracted the attention of the other forces in the surrounding area. This was especially true for the nearby Tatars. Originally, the first city belonged to them. Now, not only was it occupied by someone else, the 5,000 commoners who were sent to fetch water were also snatched away by someone else. Out of the 1,000 cavalrymen that were sent out, about 200 of them had died. This was already considered hatred. It was a kind of hatred that had to be avenged. Not only the Tatar army, even Haruruachu of the Wara, who had suffered a loss at the hands of Yang Qindong, had also sent out scouts to inquire about them after losing the battle. The movement in the beginning city was big enough. Of course, it had attracted their attention. For a time, they were eager to give it a try. In addition, there were also the Mongolian tribes in the Gobi Desert. Khan Sud suffered a great loss at the hands of Yang Qindong. When he returned to the tribe, he was also criticized. This made him feel ashamed. At this time, the scouts sent back news that they had found the 5-star army that had once caused them a loss. They were building the beginning city. But at the same time, there was another piece of news. That was, the 5-star army was actually a mercenary army. Their leader was the war god of the great Ming dynasty who had defeated the leader of the Wala, Yesen. He was the great Ming dynasty's Duke of Loyalty, Yang Qindong. The 5-star army was a mercenary army. The army that was building the beginning city was a mercenary army. When this news was intentionally released by Yang Chendong, it quickly shocked the area. Some of the forces that were originally eager to make a move couldn't help but suppress the idea of making a move. They decided to wait and see first. Who was Yesin? Presumably, there was no one in the grassland who didn't know about him. In the coup 3 years ago, this person defeated the great Ming dynasty's hundreds of thousands of main forces. At one point, he almost breached the capital of the great Ming dynasty. How glorious was that? However, such a powerful person with a powerful cavalry team was still defeated by a Han scholar in his early 20s. After the war, this person also received an even more resounding nickname, War God. Chapter 698. This battle caused the name of the god of war to resound throughout the Mongolian grasslands. This made many people want to get to know this person better. Now, this person had appeared on the grasslands and was in front of them. As the saying went, a person's name was like a tree's shadow. After he announced his name, who knew how many Mongolian soldiers were afraid? They had no choice but to withdraw their evil claws. They wanted to take a look first. The construction of the first city was still in full swing. When Yang Chendong intentionally asked the reconnaissance camp to release the news that the mercenary army would purchase a large amount of wood and a large number of stones needed for the construction of the city, they would purchase them at a price 10% higher than the market price as long as they were sent to the first city and the materials were suitable. More and more nearby merchants had come here to do business. More and more materials were sent in from all directions, and the construction speed of the city began to increase. More and more people came to work here, freeing up a large number of mercenaries. However, the construction speed did not slow down. After 20 days, the outer city walls had begun to take shape. Looking from afar, it looked majestic. What was even more surprising was that no army had come to find trouble or attack this place after such a big move, which was tantamount to snatching meat from the mouths of others. This could be said to be a miracle. However, only Yang Chendong knew that this was only because of his name as the god of war and the strength of the mercenaries. This fear was only temporary. Once the 3 divisions of the Lungfeng division moved large amounts of resources into the city, and once he had a supply line and trade route from the first city to Hightown, under the temptation of great benefits, there would be people who could not resist the temptation to attack. As for when that day would come, it all depended on when the 3 divisions of the Lungfeng division returned. At this time, the 3 divisions of the Lungfeng division had already walked past the Daxing, a mountain, and came to the Liao River. They were heading towards the Jianzhou left guard by the Songhua River. At this time, the Jianzhou left guard was not the same as before. First, the 2,000 cavalrymen led by Liang Xian and Wei Zhan were destroyed. Then, Tang Longtian led 2,000 infantrymen and disappeared by the Liao River. Their strength had been greatly reduced. For this matter, the commander of the Imperial Guard, Agila, sent someone to ask for help from the general of the new Urgan Du-Si, who was also the Du-Si commander Song Quan. The people had been sent out, but it would take some time to get a result. It was at this moment that the 3 divisions of the Cold Front Division suddenly appeared in the vicinity of the Jianzhou left guard. When they heard the news from their scouts that an unknown but massive army was passing through their territory, how could they not be alarmed? Ever since Commander Liang Xian was informed of the incident, Abdullah had sent many people to investigate the situation. At one point, the incident had even alerted the embroidered uniform guard stationed in the new Urgandusi region. It had to be said that this organization was very capable. After they began to pay attention to this matter and sent people out, the news quickly spread that this incident was most likely done by the 5-Star Army. The 5-Star Army's actions in the new Urgan-Du-Si region were indeed very low-key. Perhaps many people didn't take them seriously. However, what did the embroidered uniform guards do for a living? They were good at grasping details. When they were certain of something, they could even fabricate details if there weren't any. Not to mention, the 5-Star Army had thousands of brothers. They had long taken note of such a force, but they didn't pay attention to the high level. After visiting, the embroidered uniform guards first locked onto Ding Shan, who had made a deal with the vice-chiliarch of the Twin Cities Guard, Zhang Mingji. After drawing a sketch of this person and comparing it, the name of the 5-Star Army's reconnaissance company commander came out. Everything was settled. After the incident was reported, the five-star army became the main opponent of the Ming Guard's army. They were an existence that everyone wanted to kill. However, for some reason, the targets suddenly disappeared. It was as if they had evaporated from the world. They couldn't find their location. Speaking of which, since they couldn't find the five-star army, they could only continue to investigate. At this moment, the three divisions of the Cold Front Division appeared. They didn't have the slightest intention of hiding and walked out openly. Not only that, but they even headed straight for the Jianzhou Left Guard's base. Their target was so clear that it gave the guard commander Abdullah a fright. Abdullah ordered his men to close the city gate, which wasn't too tall or too big, while gathering more than 1,600 infantrymen. He personally went up the city gate tower and watched the army slowly approaching from afar. Cold sweat kept dripping down his forehead. As mentioned before, Abdullah was good at fighting. He had relied on his own abilities to reach his position. It was precisely because of this that he was different from those who had inherited their official positions. He had a more precise ability to judge and analyze the battlefield. When he saw the three divisions of the Cold Front Division approaching from afar, his intuition told him that if both sides were to fight, he wouldn't be a match for them. At the thought of this, more cold sweat dripped down his forehead. He thought to himself, "What's going on? Why did a force that didn't belong to us suddenly appear?" By then, whoever wanted to use the mercenaries would have to pay 10 times, 100 times, or even 1,000 times the price. The great Ming dynasty's Duke of Loyalty and Courage was nicknamed the God of War. Not to mention, during the year that this person went to the south, he had successively defeated the troublemaking Huang bandit army and destroyed Jiaoji and Kanglan nations. This was something that even the great Ming dynasty could not do. Now that Yang Qindong had done it, how could such a person be easy to deal with? Now that this person had appeared in his line of sight, Abdullah already had the feeling that he was no match for this person even before the battle started. Then again, he was only a commander of the Imperial Guard and his authority was limited. Such a major matter was not something that he could make the decision on. He still needed to seek instructions from the higher-ups and listen to their arrangements. Abdullah did not want to offend the other party, so he quickly replied, "General, this matter is of great importance. Please allow me to seek instructions from the higher-ups before making a decision. Of course, to express our goodwill, we will do our best to provide you with food during the few days that you are waiting. Is that all right?" The supplies needed to be prepared and shipped from Qiqian City to Hightown. It would take some time for them to be shipped by sea. What the Longfeng's three divisions had the most now was time. What they needed to do was to make use of this free time to build up their invincible influence. Therefore, it did not matter where they stopped as long as they could intimidate the enemy. "All right, we agree. General, please make the application to the higher-ups as soon as possible." Chen Bo agreed on behalf of the three divisions. With a wave of his hand, the cavalrymen dismounted and began to set up camp 5 miles in front of Jian Province's left guard. Abdullah returned to the barracks from the city tower and immediately wrote an urgent letter. He then ordered his trusted aide to deliver it to the city where the commander was stationed. After that, he arranged for the soldiers in the barracks to send some extra food to the foot of the city in baskets. Speaking of which, after losing 2,000 cavalrymen and 2,000 infantrymen, they still had a lot of food left. The Longfeng's three divisions did not hold back and arranged for their soldiers to receive the food at the foot of the city. They did not seem to be on guard at all, which showed that they had no ulterior motives. This made Abdullah feel more at ease. The fact that the other party was willing to accept the food meant that they were expressing their goodwill. In this case, the other party should not attack anymore. Otherwise, why would they go through so much trouble? Chapter 699. Food was sent out on time every day, and Abdullah would go up to the city tower to check on the situation. Not only him, but all the soldiers in the guard station were also paying close attention to the army below the city. As time went by, even the Ming citizens in the city would use their connections to go up to the city tower just to see the army under the Duke of Loyalty's command. Everyone was shocked by what they saw. No one knew if it was intentional or not, but the next morning, the three divisions of the Cold Front Division began their military training and drills. The three divisions of the Cold Front Division had been expanded after the Battle of Liao River, and some of them were former soldiers of the Ming Guard Station. They formed the 4th and 5th Battalions of the Cold Front Division with the veterans of the Cold Front Division. In other words, the 4th and 5th Battalions of the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Regiments were all recruit battalions, and their combat strength was relatively weak. However, this was only in comparison. If they were to fight against the Nuzen cavalry, they would not lose out. There were a total of 6 battalions, and because they were newly formed, their combat strength was not up to the overall standard of the Cold Front Division. In order to let them catch up in time, Division Commander Wu Shang and Political Commissar Chun Bo purposely increased the intensity and standard of their training. Now that they had time to stay below the city, of course they would not abandon their training. Not only that, they also increased the intensity of their training. Every day at dawn, the soldiers of the 6 battalions would get out of bed, run a few laps around the camp, and only stop when they had covered a distance of 10 kilometers. Then, they would practice slashing with their swords, and each person would slash at least 200 times. When they were done, it was time for breakfast. Only then did the soldiers have half an hour to rest. After breakfast, the training continued. Each person would slash 200 times, and then it was target practice. Of course, considering the amount of ammunition they had, it was impossible for them to use live ammunition right away. First, they had to practice various postures. For example, one person would have to practice for 2 hours to raise the gun. They also had to hang a heavy stone under the butt of the gun to practice their stability and so on. In the afternoon, it was time for cavalry training. Getting on the horse to slash, getting on the horse to raise the spear, and so on. At night, there would be an hour of sparring practice. The warriors would put on all kinds of armor and then fight with wooden sabers. It was common for them to bleed and get injured. After an hour, it would be a day and a half of rest and study time. At least half an hour of learning, including various maps, hand gestures, and other skills, before they could sleep for the day. At this time, the soldiers would start snoring after entering their tents. There were even sounds of teeth grinding, farting, and so on. However, no one blamed the other comrades because everyone was very tired. It could be said that they fell asleep as soon as they touched the pillow. Again and again, every day was the same training. All of this fell into the eyes of the Ming army generals and common people on the city gate tower. Abdullah had sighed in his heart more than once. This is a strong army. Their training methods are very scientific. They definitely won't be able to stop such an army. Not to mention that he only had a little over 1,000 infantrymen. Even if he was given 10,000 or 50,000 men, he would not think that he could defeat such a powerful enemy. Hopefully, Shangguan will agree to open up a path for them. It's definitely a nightmare to be enemies with such people. General Abdullah sighed in his heart as he anxiously waited for Shangguan's reply. This wait lasted for 10 days. Finally, a cavalry scout came from afar with a letter in his arms. It represented the attitude of the New Urgan city toward the mercenaries. Whether they would fight or cooperate, the result would be clear soon. Abdullah received the letter from the scout with a nervous heart. He opened it silently. His expression changed rapidly. His brows were furrowed and relaxed at times. The letter was written by the city's commander, Song Quan. According to the letter, the embroidered uniform guard had already determined that the 5-star army was part of the mercenaries. In other words, the horse robbery that happened here, including the Liao River incident, should be the work of the mercenaries. Come to think of it, this was probably the only army in the world that could eliminate more than 10,000 enemies without leaving any traces or evidence behind. The letter also said that since the mercenaries provoked them first, it would not be a problem for them to retaliate appropriately. Considering the strength of the mercenaries, the lack of orders from the higher-ups, and the fact that Yang Chendong was a loyal duke recognized by the great Ming dynasty, they only needed to retaliate appropriately and did not need to go all out. Abdullah heaved a sigh of relief when he read this. He no longer considered what the mercenaries had done to them. His observations over the past few days told him that the mercenaries were not to be trifled with, not at all. The contents of the letter made Abdullah feel even more relieved. Considering the current situation of the Jian Province Left Guard, the higher-ups would not send them into battle personally. It was not just the Jian Province Left Guard. Even the larger Jian Province Guard and Shenyang Central Guard did not have any cavalry, so they did not need to use them. This time, The higher-ups would directly send 3,000 cavalrymen to test the mercenaries' capabilities. What Abdullah needed to do was to stand below the city gate tower and record everything that happened from the beginning to the end of the battle in detail. He could then report it truthfully when he returned. After reading the letter, Abdullah had mixed feelings. The higher-ups were not willing to let the mercenaries off easily. They wanted to be selective and test them appropriately. However, was this necessary? Perhaps 10 days ago, when the 3 Lungfeng division masters had just arrived, Abdullah also had the same thought. However, after watching the mercenaries training for 10 days, especially after watching the 3 divisions 9 Lungfeng division battalions train, he had long given up on such thoughts. The 9 battalions were quiet, but when they moved like flood dragons. Not only were their horsemanship superb, but they also practiced chopping 500 times in a row. Not only were there sufficient numbers, but their speed was also very fast. He had seen with his own eyes the wooden stakes that had been set up to act as imaginary enemies being split in half in a very short period of time. That saber seems different too. It's sharper and tougher than ours. Abdullah could not help but sigh as he thought about it. Then, he began to look forward to the outcome of the 3,000 cavalrymen sent by the higher-ups. He also wanted to encourage his own cavalry, but for some reason, he could not muster up the strength to do so. In the military camp outside the city, Division Master Wu Sheng had just returned from his chopping training. Compared to the ordinary Lungfeng warriors, he had set himself a requirement of 600 slashes in a row. While he had to make an extra 100 slashes, the time requirement was the same. In other words, if the warriors could make 500 slashes in the same amount of time, he would have to make 600 slashes to qualify. As the Lungfeng warriors' military quality continued to improve, as the division master, Wu Sheng's expectations of himself became higher and higher. He returned covered in sweat. As soon as he received a towel from the correspondent, Political Commissar Chun Bo appeared in front of him. Division Master, the Ming division has already sent someone back to the city. They should have received some news. However, the other party has no intention of contacting us. It seems like the news is not necessarily good. I'm afraid we'll have to fight. The moment Chen Bo entered the room, he took a towel from the correspondent behind him and wiped his face. It was obvious that he was also covered in sweat. It was obvious that he had just finished his training. Let's fight then. If we don't fight, some people won't know how powerful we are. The warriors below have been holding back for a long time. It's a good opportunity for them to vent their frustrations, Wu Sheng said nonchalantly. His face was filled with fighting spirit and confidence. All right, let's wait and see. Chen Bo said unhurriedly. In their eyes, the Ming division's cavalrymen were nothing. Even though they knew that a big battle was coming, they were not nervous at all. They did not even need to prepare. This was because the 3 divisions of the Lungfeng division had always been on the first level of combat readiness. They were ready to fight at any time. Being unprepared was the best preparation. This was a strong confidence in one's own strength. 3 days later, in the morning, from the northeast of the 3 divisions' barracks, a cavalry troop that seemed to cover the sky and earth came from afar. They left a trail of dust behind them. They're here. Division Commander Wu Sheng and Political Commissar Chen Bo, who were still instructing the troops to practice shooting, immediately reacted. The troops immediately gathered, mounted their horses, and carried their swords. They were eager to fight. As soon as the troops gathered, a scout rushed back and rushed in front of the division commander and political commissar, reporting to the chief. It's the Ming division's cavalrymen. There are about 3,000 of them. 3,000? After hearing this, Wu Sheng shook his head with some disinterest. 3,000 is really too little. That's right. It's a little too little. This time, even political commissar Chan Bo agreed. However, they did not know that if their opponents heard these words, they would be enraged. They had seen people look down on others, but they had never seen people look down on others like this. The 2 division commanders looked at each other and smiled helplessly. They said at the same time, "Who do you think we should send?" They said the words at the same time. Then, the 2 looked at each other and smiled. They were prepared to fight personally, but the enemy only had 3,000 men. To be honest, it was too little. It was so little that they were embarrassed to fight with their subordinates. They both understood each other's thoughts. In the end, Political Commissar Chinbo said, "Then let's rest for a while. We have to give the soldiers who came later a chance to show off. Why don't we send the third commander to lead the 6 battalions? 6 battalions against 3,000 cavalrymen. That's reasonable." Wu Sheng thought about it carefully and nodded in agreement. 6 battalions meant that each battalion had 400 men, which was 2,400 men. Although these people were not enough to deal with the enemy's 3,000 cavalrymen, to Lung Feng, this was already bullying. The 6 battalions were formed later, so their overall strength was slightly weaker. If it was the elite Cold Front Division, 3 battalions would be enough. Chapter 700. After the 2 division commanders came to a decision, they called the 3rd Regiment Commander, Spring Sun, over and passed on the order. Regiment Commander Spring, this performance will directly affect whether our supply route will be smooth in the future. It will directly affect the future plans of the 6th Young Master. This is extremely important. Are you confident that you can complete this mission? Chen Bo said as soon as he saw Spring Sunday Division Commander Wu Sheng's words were even more direct. Spring Sun, if you can complete this mission, then accept it. If not, then go back to your 3rd regiment. I can't wait to do it myself. Hey, what are you two talking about? You can look down on me, Spring Sun, but you can't look down on the soldiers below. I don't mind making a military pledge here. If this battle can't be fought to our heart's content, if it can't go smoothly, if we can't show the might of our 3rd regiment, then I won't be a regiment commander anymore. I'll just be a cook and take the blame for everyone, Spring Sun said excitedly, even throwing out the military pledge at the first moment. It was no wonder that Spring Sun was so excited. He originally thought that this battle had nothing to do with him. He knew that no matter if it was Division Commander Wu Sheng or Political Commissar Chen Bo, they were both battle-hungry people like him. Plus, they were the regiment commanders of the 1st and 2nd Regiment respectively. There shouldn't be any chance for him to perform in this battle. He didn't think that he, who had already given up hope, would be hit by this meat pie. He was extremely excited and overjoyed. In order to prevent the mission from being snatched by others, of course he would say whatever he could. With the military pledge, Spring Sun could be considered to have accepted this mission. Next, he called the 6 battalion commanders of the newly formed battalions in front of him. Naturally, he gave them another round of encouragement and bold words. The strength of these 6 battalions had greatly increased under the recent training, and they wanted to perform well in a real battle. Now that they had the chance, who wouldn't yell and pat their chest? Immediately, the 6 battalion commanders also made the military pledge. In less than a quarter of an hour, the 6 battalions were ready for battle. At this moment, Wu Sheng and Chen Bo had already led the rest of the Cold Blade warriors to retreat. They left the stage open and gave Chunyang and the other 6 battalions a chance to perform. Everyone, listen up. Each person only has a chance to fire 3 bullets. Regardless of whether they hit the target or not, they would charge together with their leader. Don't worry, everyone. Bring out the strength you've been training with. It's enough to deal with the enemy. Standing at the front of the group, Chunyang looked at the 6 square formations behind him and shouted in a heroic voice. Kill, kill, kill. Behind him, more than 2,000 people shouted in unison. This voice shook the 9 heavens, as if it could shatter the horizon. Above the city gate tower, Abdullah also witnessed the scene before him. When he recognized that the 6 battalions that the mercenaries had sent out were the weakest 6 battalions during the training, he couldn't help but widen his eyes and say, facing a powerful opponent with 3,000 cavalrymen, they sent out the weakest ones. And there were less than 3,000 of them? This mercenaries, where did they get their confidence from? It wasn't just Abdullah. Some of the other Kiliarchs and Baihu standing beside him were also confused. Someone whispered, "This is clearly the mercenaries underestimating the enemy. If that's the case, we'll have a good show to watch." That's right. Your mercenaries may be strong, but if you underestimate the cavalrymen of the Beiming City Guard, you'll have to pay a heavy price. While the crowd on the city gate tower was still discussing, the 3,000 cavalrymen of the Beiming City Guard were getting closer and closer. Their speed was also gradually increasing. It was obvious that the enemy had no intention of stopping. Clearly, they wanted to use this speed to charge in front of the mercenaries and increased the charging force of their cavalrymen. From this point alone, it was clear that the Biming city guard had no lack of powerful people. In fact, the leader of this troop was the commandant of the Biming city guard, Yi Ligong. He was a major third-grade general and was one of the top 5 figures in the entire new Urgon City Guard district. If it weren't for the existence of the Imperial Eunuch Supervisor and the Imperial Eunuch Guard, he would be the number 3 figure in the city. How could a person like him not have strength? How could a person like him not know how to lead troops into battle? Everyone, slowly increase your speed. When the two sides are 2 li apart, charge forward. We need to use our momentum to break the enemy's courage. We need to let the Duke of Loyalty know that mercenaries aren't the only ones who can fight. The cavalrymen of the Biming City Guard are also unparalleled in the world. Standing in the middle of the troop, Yi Ligong urged his horse forward as he shouted loudly. He was trying his best to motivate the troops before the battle. Kill, kill, kill. The same shout came from the Biming City Guard, but for some reason, it didn't sound uniform. It wasn't as heroic and passionate as the previous mercenaries. Facing the charge of the Biming City Guard from afar, Chunyang didn't move at all. The 6 battalions behind him didn't move either. They stood there like statues, allowing the enemy to approach them step by step. The distance between the two sides was getting closer and closer. Then, there was a flash of cold light. It was like a sharp knife that was about to pierce into the enemy's heart. For this moment, all the soldiers were shouting with all their might. It was as if they didn't do so, they wouldn't be able to increase their strength and vent their powerful momentum. They're about to clash. On the city tower, Abdullah clenched his fists and stared at the scene in front of him. Who was stronger and who was weaker? The answer would be revealed soon. Even though he already knew the answer in his heart, he still hoped that his side would win, even though it seemed impossible. Yes, it was indeed impossible. Just as the two sides were about to collide and were less than 300 meters away from each other, a shocking scene occurred. Like dominoes, the Biming City Guard fell from their horses one after another. In the blink of an eye, over 1,000 men had fallen from their horses. The sudden turn of events caused the originally ambitious general Yi Ligong to turn pale with fright. He suddenly thought of the gunshots he had heard before. Could it be that all of this had happened because of that? Although the new city guard was located in a remote area, they knew that the mercenaries had continuous fire guns. However, that was all they knew. They knew that the Great Ming dynasty also had firearms and the Divine Arms Battalion, so they didn't think much of it. It was the same for Yi Ligong when he heard the gunshots just now. He had tried firing firearms on horseback before. When the horses were still, they were still somewhat accurate. However, once the horses moved, they would be firing randomly. The effectiveness of the firearms was very limited. It was precisely because of this experience that he didn't think much of the gunshots. However, he suddenly understood that his brothers who suddenly fell from their horses must have been hit by the firearms. But how could there be so many of them? Yes, there were too many of them. Nearly half of the 3,000 cavalrymen died before they could even get close to the enemy. However, this was not the most important thing. The most important thing was that the casualties were all soldiers, but the warhorses were fine. What did this mean? Chapter 701. This meant that the enemy's marksmanship was extremely accurate. Not a single shot hit the ground or hurt the horses. This was a terrifying outcome. If the enemy launched another wave of musket attacks like this, would there still be anyone alive around him? Even if he did, would he be able to survive? At this moment, Yi Ligong was terrified. He instinctively pulled on the reins. He wanted to see what would happen. He did not want to lose his life here. There were quite a few people who had the same thoughts as Yi Ligong. They intentionally slowed down and watched as some of their companions charged into the mercenary camp. Boom! Finally, the cavalry from both sides collided. Blood splattered everywhere. Heads were tossed into the air, horses neighed, and corpses fell to the ground. It was only the first charge. Due to the difference in numbers, the difference in the number of strikes, and the absolute suppression of strength, hundreds of Biming cavalry were cut down from their horses. They fell to the ground and became minced meat under the horses' hooves. Retreat. Retreat quickly. After this collision, The last bit of hope in Yi Ligong's heart had disappeared. Seeing his subordinates being chopped into minced meat the moment they entered the enemy's formation, he, who had already stopped his horse, turned around and fled without any hesitation or politeness. The main general suddenly turned around and fled with his bodyguards. Following that, more and more northern Ming cavalry also cursed and wanted to turn around and flee. However, it was not that easy to escape. Behind them, Chun Yong had already led his cavalry and charged forward. Under their repeated attacks, Bai Ming cavalry were cut down one after another. When some of the northern Ming cavalrymen wanted to counterattack, they suddenly realized that their companions were no longer around. When he had to face the continuous attacks of more than a dozen cold vanguard cavalrymen, he could block one or two strikes, but could he block the third strike, the fourth strike, or even more? In the first place, the speed of the saber attacks was not as fast as a human's. After blocking a few attacks, the surrounded northern Ming cavalry were like sheep that had entered a wolf's den. They were instantly devoured, and not even their bones were left behind. Such a scene continued to happen on the battlefield. Wherever there was a surviving northern Ming cavalryman, there would be a dozen or even dozens of cold vanguard cavalrymen slaughtering him. As a result, the northern Ming cavalrymen were like small boats sailing in the sea, facing huge waves one after another. No one could survive, no one. Originally, it should have been an evenly matched cavalry charge, but it had turned into a completely one-sided situation. From the beginning to the end, only half an hour had passed. Other than Yi Ligong, who escaped with less than 50 bodyguards, the other 2,950 Bai Ming cavalry were all killed. Not a single captive was left. Not even a single wounded person was left. Of course, this was because Lung Feng wanted to establish his dominance, but at the same time, it was also because the 6 battalions were too eager to prove their worth. That was why they didn't hold back and killed with all their might, resulting in this outcome. Tabulate the battle results. Spring Sun was covered in blood. He had killed more than 4 Bai Ming cavalry. Although it wasn't as many as he had expected, he had no choice. He had killed too many people with his muskets. It was already good enough that he was able to get 4. Without any enemies, he began to tabulate the battle results. He wanted to see how many casualties he had suffered. 13 of my battalion died. 7 are wounded. 16 of my battalion are wounded. No wounded. 12 of my brothers died. 2 are wounded. 13 of my brothers died. No wounded. 7 of my battalion died. 4 are wounded. All of them are lightly wounded. My battalion. The battle results were quickly tabulated. Spring Sun nodded to show that he understood. He turned around and galloped towards Division Commander Wu Shang and Political Commissar Qin Bo, reporting to Division Commander, Political Commissar. In this battle, 70 of our brothers died. 18 are wounded. We killed 2,950 enemies. No prisoners. When Spring Sun arrived in front of the 2 division commanders and reported the results of the battle, the 3 divisions couldn't help but burst into thunderous cheers. This result made Wu Shang and Qin Bo very satisfied. There were always casualties in war. It didn't matter if you had the right time, the right place, or the right people. After all, accidents were everywhere. To be able to kill nearly 3,000 enemies with less than 100 casualties was already a miracle. Good, very good. We will remember this great achievement. Let's celebrate tonight. Division Commander Wu Sheng laughed loudly. At this moment, he knew that the quasi-cold vanguard of the 6 battalions had become a qualified cold vanguard brother after this bloody battle. The combat strength of the 3 divisions had also improved greatly after this battle. Oh, we won. The other cold vanguard warriors couldn't help but cheer and shout loudly when they heard the celebration. When these voices reached the city, Abdullah's face turned pale with fright. He still didn't know the final result of the battle. However, Bai Ming's cavalry had been defeated, and they had been defeated very quickly and thoroughly. He saw it clearly. When night came, out of fear, they took out more food and sent it to the 3 divisions. The exact results of the battle had also been announced. Less than 100 casualties, 2,950 enemies killed, and nearly 3,000 warhorses were taken. The result made Abdullah almost lose his balance and fall to the ground. With the help of his personal guards, Abdullah sat back down on his chair and remained silent for a long time. He had already determined a fact in his heart. The mercenaries were powerful and could not be provoked. Whoever dared to provoke them would end up dead. Of course, he didn't forget to report everything he saw and heard to his superiors. He could already imagine what their decision would be after seeing this report. The path of the cold vanguard had to be given up, and it had to be given up completely. The camp of the 3 divisions. The banquet, celebration, and recording of achievements were carried out in an orderly manner. Countless soldiers used their military merits to exchange for cigarettes, ham sausages, canned food, and other things. When they held these items in their hands, many of them shed tears. They were originally Ming's cavalry and looked very powerful. However, only they knew that they were nothing more than a facade. However, after joining the 3 divisions, they had undergone a transformation. They were still themselves, but in front of their former comrades, they were already superior. Even if they couldn't do anything now and retired, they would still be able to get a sum of money to spend the rest of their lives. Although there was still a long way to go before they could become rich, at least they could live a normal life and get married and have children. However, was this really their goal in life? No. They could still continue to work hard and obtain more glory and wealth. After a few more years of hard work, it wouldn't be a problem for them to build a good family background and property for their descendants. At this moment, the hearts of the soldiers were filled with hope and longing for the future. The birth of these ideals would make them stronger and more fearless. This battle established the belief that the 3 divisions were powerful and invincible. Not long after, New Urgandusi issued a clear rule. It said that the mercenaries were fighting for the peace of Ming's north and were worthy of respect. It was also very reasonable that they needed a logistical supply line. No guards were allowed to obstruct or interfere. Otherwise, they would be severely punished. This was the result of fighting. This was the result of showing their strength. Everything was not out of Wu Shang and Qin Bo's expectations. They knew that they were very close to completing the mission given by the 6th young master. The next day after receiving the news, the 3 divisions left Jian Province's Zhuowei City and headed straight for Sea Town. The supplies were already at sea and would arrive soon. Their next mission was to gather at Sea Town and then unload the supplies and transport them back to Shur City. Then, they would be done. As for the safety of this road in the future, they were not worried. Unless they didn't want to live, they really couldn't think of anyone who would dare to stop the logistical army under the banner of mercenaries here. Shur City. It had been a month and a half since they occupied this place and started the construction. During this period of time, the city had undergone great changes. The appearance of the city had taken shape with the investment of a huge amount of manpower, material resources, and financial resources. The construction in the city had already begun. When they walked to the street, Shur City had become much more lively. Originally, there were only 1,000 people in the city. Now, the number of people in the city had reached more than 2,000, nearly 10,000 people. The fact that the population in the city could increase so much in such a short period of time naturally had a lot to do with Yang Qindong's personal and external policies. Duke of Loyalty, God of War, and even Dong Shuai were some of Yang Qindong's nicknames. He had been famous for a long time. It was difficult for others not to know him. With his personal influence, first of all, some Han people who lived alone nearby were willing to come to the city. During this period of time, Su Yunqing's reconnaissance battalion, in addition to monitoring the movements of the nearby Mongolian tribes, had another important task, which was to constantly convey the news of the policies towards the Han people. For example, the Duke of Loyalty was the savior of the Han people. As long as they were Han people and were willing to follow the rules, the Duke of Loyalty would help them, give them work, give them food, and let them live a better life. These slogans and news spread everywhere. Not only the Han people, but also the Mongolian people. As long as they were willing to follow the rules of the city and had the strength and were willing to work, they were also welcomed. They could work to earn money and use the silver or copper coins to buy various items that they needed. Shur City was an open city. It was a city with full freedom. It was a city that pursued fairness and reasonableness. As long as you were willing to come and follow the rules here, you would become a welcome person. Here, as long as you put in effort, you would be rewarded. It was very fair. There was no oppression or oppression. Your things were yours. You didn't have to worry that everything would be gone when you woke up. Chapter 702. It was precisely this concept that attracted groups of people to settle in after it was spread out. First, it was a few people, then a dozen people, then dozens of people. Soon, it expanded to hundreds of people, thousands of people, and then nearly 10,000 people. Even this number was increasing every day. Speaking of which, everything was due to the rules of the grassland. It was particular about the law of the jungle. Whoever was more powerful would have all the good things. As for the weak, some people might sympathize with them, but it was only sympathy. On the day you were bullied, no hero would appear to help you. They were used to snatching and being robbed when they saw good things. As a result, many kind-hearted people did not like to stay on the grassland, especially those who lived alone. They often did not have a neighbor within dozens or even hundreds of miles. Once they encountered a grassland bandit, they could only wait for death. This feeling was very bad. If it was in the past, they did not have a place to go and did not have a better way to solve the problem. It seemed that they could only choose to join a grassland tribe. Even so, they had to pay too much and could become a sacrifice in the war at any time. If they were unlucky and the leader of the tribe took a fancy to something, they would also have to contribute. That feeling was like falling into a bandit's lair. The first city was different. As long as one was willing to come here, there would be a ready-made house for one to live in. Of course, one would have to pay the rent every month. However, this was not a problem. There were many jobs to do in the city now. Building a city and building houses was a rich income. As long as one worked hard to earn money, one would not have to worry about it. As long as one had their own house, anything that they earned would belong to them. No one would come to rob them, no matter who the other party was or what kind of identity they had. Otherwise, the law enforcement team that appeared on the streets at any time in the city would teach the other party how to behave. It was this kind of protection policy that attracted a large number of people to the first city. When they familiarized themselves with the rules here and found that it was indeed different from the outside world, many people quickly fell in love with this place. While they chose to live here, they also spread the news, allowing more relatives and friends to come and stay here. After all, everyone would want to have more old friends by their side when they arrived at a new place. This would give them a sense of security. There were more and more people in the city, and the labor problem was solved accordingly. In the largest mansion in the beginning city, Yang Chendong was sitting there and resting. Some of the tension on his face disappeared, and there was a trace of relaxation. This was a newly built backyard. There was a large pond and even a rockery. To be able to have such things in the prairie city could only be described as extravagant. However, no one thought that this was wrong. The sixth young master had done so much for everyone. Was it wrong for him to want a better environment and conditions to rest? No one should even think of shaking Yang Chendong's position in the army or speaking ill of him. Otherwise, he would be beaten up so badly that even his mother wouldn't be able to recognize him. Sitting in the garden to rest, Yang Chendong did not forget to look at the information in his hand. It seemed like a while had passed, but it also seemed like a long time had passed. He lifted his head and looked at Tiger's Mane, who was at the side, and asked, "This is the data from this morning. It says that the number of people in the city has exceeded 10,000? Yes, the statistics were out last night. The number of people is about 10,300. Hee. Compared to the 9,800 people from the day before, there are 500 more people now. This number should increase today. Young master, you're amazing." Tiger's Mane could not help but give him a thumbs up when he mentioned this. When the city was first built, the city was so vast, and it was not that no one had discussed it before. They thought that this was a grassland after all, and it was different from the Central Plains. It was normal to not see a single family for dozens of miles. In such a place, building a city was originally a very extravagant thing, let alone building such a big city. Looking at the sixth young master's meaning, the beginning city could accommodate 500,000 people. This was indeed a very frightening number. Even the Mongolian tribes who had lived here for generations did not dare to think about it. They could not see that the sixth young master could do it. Some people even thought that this was the first time that the sixth young master had made a wrong judgment. The development of the facts was indeed not satisfactory at the beginning. Although the reconnaissance camp had released a lot of information, it was still very limited that it could attract people. In the first few days, they did not see anyone coming here, let alone living here. However, the situation slowly changed. From a few people who came in a day at the beginning, to more than 10 people, and then to a few hundred people now. The number of people in the city began to increase. More importantly, almost none of the people who came here had walked here before, and that was the most important thing. It was not easy to attract people here, but the most important thing was how to attract people to not leave after they came here. Now it seemed that the sixth young master had done a very good job. The people below could not help but sigh again. The sixth young master was the sixth young master. His vision of things was not comparable to that of ordinary people. Tiger's mane naturally had never questioned Yang Chendong. On the contrary, he had a kind of blind worship. In his opinion, as long as it was the sixth young master's words, it must be the truth. As long as it was the sixth young master's words, it must be incomparably correct. However, he could not stop the people below him from talking. Now that he had used facts to slap some people in the face, he naturally felt honored and happy. Haha. Looking at Tiger's mane's sincere and happy smile, Yang Chendong, who was infected, also laughed. Then, as if he had thought of something, he asked, "By the way, why are you always in front of me recently? Don't you still have to lead the independent regiment? I have young heir here. If you have something to do, you can do it yourself." Young master, the independent regiment's combat power has improved a lot. Now, when we have nothing to do, we will compete with the Jurchen cavalry regiment. Although we can't win, if we can use firearms, I guarantee that we can destroy the other party in minutes. Besides, with Deputy Regiment Commander Xi and Hong Hai watching over there, I am very relieved. Tiger's mane was reserved and smiled proudly. Is the independent regiment that powerful? This was the first time Yang Chendong heard of it. The main reason was that he had been focusing his energy on building the city recently. Although he had a lot of people under him this time, and many of them were smart and capable, there was really no better person to manage the affairs of the city. Those people were all martial artists. When it came to war, their eyes were wide open. But when it came to managing the city, they instantly wilted. He did not know whether to laugh or cry. He had no choice but to do it himself. After all, a person's energy was limited. If he was busy with government affairs, he would not be able to care about the army. Now that he heard Tiger's mane say that the independent regiment's combat power had greatly improved, he was interested. He asked about the Jurchen cavalry regiment and the strengthening of the 1st and 2nd Cavalry Regiment. According to Ming, the combat strength of these 4 regiments was increasing every day. In order to achieve more military merits, they would seize the opportunity to train whenever they had the chance. Moreover, it was the kind of training that everyone was willing to do. When they had nothing to do, the 4 regiments would also practice against each other, and the improvement of their combat power was much faster. Good. It is a good thing that you all can take the initiative to think of ways to improve your combat power. This is positive and should be encouraged. Yang Chendong was very happy after hearing this. However, after saying this, he quickly changed his tone and said, "Be prepared for danger in times of peace. Soldiers of my generation must have this kind of awareness. When facing any possible war, we must be able to maintain the best state of mind at all times. Once a war breaks out, with a command to gather, we will be able to fight against the enemy. We must win, and we must do so at the smallest cost. Young master, will there really be people coming to find trouble with us? It has already been 1.5 months, and I don't see anyone having any ideas about us." When it came to war, Tiger's mane was interested and his voice became louder. "Hee, there will be," Yang Chendong said with certainty. If the establishment of the first city did not attract the attention of some of the surrounding forces, it attracted many people to move in with its powerful attraction. This was indeed something that some people did not want to see. On the grassland, it could be said that everything was lacking, so much so that the population was also a hot commodity. When 2 tribes fought, the winning side would often plunder all the population of the losing side in order to strengthen their own strength. The appearance of the first city had taken in all the individual households. With this, it could be said that it had touched everyone's interests, and this was the fuse of the war. Force was the most direct way to solve the conflict of interests. According to Yang Qindong's thoughts, there were probably already many enemies who could not hold back. It was just that the mercenaries and his reputation were too big, and no one wanted to be the one to stand out. However, as the first city grew stronger, it was obvious that these forces would eventually not be able to hold back, and the war should be coming. Just as Yang Qindong and Ming were chatting, a large cavalry team was setting up camp and resting at a place 500 kilometers away from the first city, near a mountain and a river. If the people from the reconnaissance camp could get close to observe, they would naturally find an old acquaintance here. He was Haru Ruachu, who had suffered a loss in Yang Qindong's hands. That's right, this was the camp of Haru Ruachu's father, Agar Dorji. Originally, he followed his elder brother to expand the Tatar forces, but he could not resist the temptation and finally conspired with the leader of the Walla, Yeshin, to assassinate his elder brother. Who would have thought that the plan would not be as fast as the changes? In the end, he did not kill his elder brother and had no choice but to escape. Now, he had become a rootless tree floating on the grassland. Agar Dorji was still a man of his own ideas. When he rebelled, he brought a total of 50,000 cavalry, which made him a powerful force on the grassland. No one dared to look down on him, and no one dared to casually find trouble with him. This made him comfortable for a while. Chapter 703. However, the daily food and drinks of the 50,000 cavalrymen was not a small expense. Although he had received some benefits from Yeshin, it would eventually run out. If one did not consider the future, there would be immediate worries. Now, Agar Dorji urgently needed a foothold and income. Otherwise, the 50,000 cavalrymen would leave him sooner or later. In order to find a suitable place, he had thought of forming an alliance with the Gobi Mongol Empire. He wanted to let his son marry Princess Tuaya and strengthen the relationship between the two sides through marriage. Unfortunately, his son Hararuo was too ugly. He was so ugly that Tuaya did not like him at all. In addition, Sudor Khan was not very courageous and was afraid that he would swallow up the other side. So the marriage did not happen. Not only that, but because of the battle with the 5-star army, he lost 5,000 cavalrymen and a general like Lumak. For this matter, Agar Dorji scolded his son and even gave him 2 horsewhips as punishment. Then, he naturally thought of finding trouble with the 5-star army. Since they beat him, they should be prepared to be beaten back. But he never thought that the 5-star army would suddenly become a mercenary army. This made Agar Dorji think of giving up. The reputation of a mercenary army and a war god was too big. In the grasslands, Yeshin's strength was obviously the strongest, especially since he had done business with Bai Ming a while ago, who knew how many rare goods were shipped to the grasslands through his hands. These goods had become sought-after goods in the eyes of the grasslands nobles. He had made a lot of money. With money, there was naturally a greater opportunity to increase his strength. It could only be said that Yeshin was stronger than before. He even had a faint sense of superiority. His strength made Yeshin somewhat dizzy. He actually wanted to find trouble with Bai Ming again, wanting to use the war to plunder and strengthen himself. After all, he had worked with Yeshin before, and their relationship was not bad. Agar Dorji had asked for Yeshin's opinion on the matter of the origin city. However, the seemingly fearless Yeshin actually gave him a piece of advice, which was that it was best not to provoke the war god because it was not something that humans could defeat. Yeshin's words were decisive. When Agar Dorji first heard it, he did hesitate. But now, he seemed to have no choice. The army's provisions would be exhausted in a month at most. If he could not find more food or a foothold during this time, there might be a mutiny in the army. If that happened, where would he go? Big brother Tuachuo Buhua had probably sent people to keep an eye on him. At that time, would he take the opportunity to deal with him? Then there was Yeshin. Although their relationship seemed to be good now, in fact, the other party couldn't wait to devour him. If it were not for the fact that he still had 45,000 cavalrymen in his hands, the other party would have taken action long ago. This could be seen from the fact that he wanted to borrow food from the other party but was rejected with all kinds of excuses. There was a wolf in front and a tiger behind. This was the true portrayal of Agar Dorji's current situation. Reality also forced him to set his sights on the origin city. The scouts he sent out had already gathered enough information. There were mercenaries and a lot of silver in the origin city. It was said that the Han people and Mongols who worked there could earn a lot of silver every day. How much money does this Duke of Loyalty have? Agar Dorji often could not help but think, and the greed in his heart grew stronger and stronger. Someone once said that when the benefits reached 10 times, it was enough to make many people forget about life and death and take risks. If the benefits could reach 100 times, many people would be willing to do it even if they knew that they might die. Now, Agar Dorji was blinded by the benefits. Or rather, he had no better way to solve the problem he was facing. It seemed that only by taking down the origin city and taking the silver there could the army be stabilized again. Once he occupied the origin city, he would have a foothold and could walk out of the current difficulties. There were so many benefits that even with Yeshin's reminder, Agar Dorji still decided to take the risk. After making a decision, he summoned his son and 2 of his generals to discuss the matter of attacking the origin city. Agar Dorji still had some tricks up his sleeves. When his brother was not under his command, he had won over some capable generals. For example, Lomuk, who had died in the previous battle, and Su He and Gulang, who were now summoned. Su He was a general who was praised by the great Khan of Tuachuo Buhua. His name was translated into Chinese and meant axe. In fact, after this person went to the battlefield, he was indeed like a sharp axe. He had cut down countless enemies. This time, when the 3 of them were summoned, the first person Agar Dorji asked was Su He. General Su, I'm going to attack the origin city. There are piles of gold and silver there, as well as strong city walls. Many people have gathered there. If we can occupy that place, they will all become our slaves. By then, we can use them to create more wealth for the army. We will not have to worry about food and clothing. Our cavalry will trample the entire grassland and dominate the area. Agar Dorji outlined a beautiful picture of the future. The more he spoke, the more excited he became. His son, Hararuo, was so excited that little stars appeared in front of his eyes. He seemed to see groups of beautiful women and piles of gold and silver in front of him for him to choose from. General Gulang's eyes also revealed a yearning look. He was very tempted. However, Su He, who was asked in the tent, was calm and was not excited by these words. General Su He, what do you think? The most important thing was Su He's ability. Seeing that the other party did not express his opinion, Agar Dorji could not help but ask anxiously. Su He, who was asked, still did not answer immediately. Instead, after thinking carefully in his mind, he slowly said, Sir, as far as I know, the war god is in the origin city. He's an existence that even Yeshin is afraid of. Can we go and find trouble with him? Why not? We've already asked around. The war god only has less than 15,000 cavalrymen under him. We do have 45,000 cavalrymen, which is 3 times the number of the enemy. This battle can be fought, Hararuo said. It could be seen that he was a little dissatisfied with Suhi's cautiousness. Yes, I think we can fight too. So what if he's the war god? After all, this is the grassland. In the end, it depends on whose warhorse is faster and whose saber is sharper. Gulang also spoke, expressing his thoughts of supporting the battle. Out of the 4 people in the tent, 3 of them had now expressed their opinions. They all supported attacking the origin city. Suhi knew that no matter whether he agreed or not, this battle had to go on. He had to nod and said, well, I respect everyone's opinions. But we can fight, but we still need to consider how to fight. Okay, then let's discuss who will be the vanguard and how to fight. Seeing that Suhi also agreed, Agar Dorji was overjoyed and set the tone. In the following time, the 4 of them discussed for a long time and finally decided to set the battlefield outside the origin city. After all, they were all cavalrymen, and siege warfare was not their forte. If the battlefield could be set in the vast grassland, they would have a higher chance of winning. Whether it was out of greed or helplessness, Agar Dorji finally decided to take action. All 45,000 cavalrymen were mobilized. They set off early the next morning with an unstoppable momentum and headed to the origin city that was 500 miles away. In the origin city, there was still no news from Agar Dorji. After all, The grassland was too big, and most of it was plains. There was no place to hide, which greatly hindered the movement of the cavalry of the reconnaissance battalion. There was no cover, so they could not get close to the enemy. Naturally, they could not be prepared in advance. It was precisely because he knew this that Yang Chendong had asked the 3 regiments under him to maintain a fighting spirit at all times. They had to be able to come whenever they were summoned, fight whenever they were summoned, and win whenever they fought. The city was still being built in an orderly manner. Another day passed, and the number of people from various races who came to the origin city increased again. It increased by 500 people day by day. Today alone, more than 1,000 people came, and most of them were Mongolian brothers who brought their families. According to the rules of entering the city, they had to register their identity first, and then pay a certain amount of money. After that, they would be arranged to use a house for a month. Finally, different jobs would be arranged according to each person's different conditions. You must carefully screen the body of the person who comes. You must not let a factor of stability appear in the city. Yang Chendong walked on the streets of the origin city. Beside him were Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei, and a group of people who were protecting him. Walking in the crowd, the 6th young master spoke from time to time about some things to pay attention to. Yes, we have special people doing the relevant work. Not only do people need to report their real names, but they also need to report the place where they used to live. We have people who will investigate this afterwards. Although I dare not say that there is no problem 100%, for those who have doubts, we have focused on monitoring. Tiger's Mane kept nodding as he reported his work. That's the way it should be. Don't let a piece of rat poop spoil the pot of soup. We can also fully mobilize the people and let them take the initiative to expose those who have bad intentions or have strange behavior. We can give them a certain amount of rewards appropriately. In this way, unless they can pretend to be the same person, they can't escape everyone's eyes. Also, if we can confirm that they are spies sent by other forces, we can also allow them to come in and sneak in. However, they can't live here. We have to let others know of our strength so that they will be afraid. Yang Chendong also nodded with a smile and gave his own experience and opinions. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.